Hello, everyone, and welcome to the place where shadows whisper and nightmares softly breathe. So close your eyes, take a slow breath. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where you from and what time are you watching? Let's get comfortable and relax.
I never used to believe in anything beyond what I could see and touch and measure. I was a man of facts, a technician, an HVAC specialist working night shifts in old buildings where silence wrapped itself around peeling walls and flickering fluorescents buzzed like dying flies. And most of my work was fixing ventilation systems in crumbling hospitals or vacant schools. The kinds of places where no one wanted to go at night. But I didn't mind because silence paid well and ghosts didn't exist. Or so I thought. Until I was called to service a retirement hospital slated for demolition on the outskirts of Baltimore, a stone and steel monstrosity that loomed over cracked pavement and dead trees like some decaying god from a forgotten religion. And when I pulled into the lot at 11:27 p.m., my headlights swept across dozens of broken windows like jagged teeth grinning in the dark. And I remember hesitating before grabbing my toolbox and stepping out into the chilled wind that seemed to whisper through the trees like breath from a dying throat, and the air smelled faintly metallic, like blood and rust. But I told myself it was just the smell of old pipes and oxidized dust, nothing more, and I entered through the side maintenance door, which creaked wide open too easily as if it had been waiting, and the building greeted me with utter silence, not even the usual hum of distant electronics or the scurrying of rats, just thick, waiting quiet, broken only by the faint echo of my boots and the occasional groan of settling beams. And as I walked deeper in, flashlight scanning decaying wallpaper and water-stained ceilings, I couldn't shake the feeling that the building wasn't empty at all, that something was breathing with me, step for step, just out of view. And I tried to shrug it off until I reached the sub-basement where the ventilation main was located, the part of the hospital where they kept the worst-off patients, the ones with failing minds and aggressive outbursts, the ones whose rooms had extra locks and padded walls. And even though this place hadn't held a soul in over 8 years, the elevator I took to get there lit up with the number B2 on its own before I pressed anything. And when I reached the bottom, the doors opened to a pitch-black hallway with tile floors slick with something wet and sticky that smelled like copper and mold. And my flashlight flickered twice before stabilizing, casting its beam on a wheelchair halfway down the corridor. Turned away from me, unmoving, but somehow fresh, with no dust, no rot, as if someone had just wheeled it there and walked away. And when I stepped closer, I realized that faint tracks of the wheels ran along the floor, glistening like snail trails, curving into the dark around the corner to the old patient rooms. And I told myself it was probably a squatter or some kids messing around, and I just needed to check the vent system and get out. So I found the maintenance panel and opened it, flicking the circuit on, and the whole floor groaned and hissed as vents shook and rattled back to life. And for a moment, I felt like everything was fine, until the smell hit me. Not just dust or decay, but something sharper, sourer, like rotted milk and bile and infection, pouring from the newly active vents like breath from something that had waited too long. And I heard something else too, faint at first, but unmistakable, the sound of whispering, not voices I could understand, but dry, papery murmurs, like old tongues flicking behind teeth that hadn't tasted flesh in years. And I shined my light into the open vent, half expecting to see a rat or bird's nest, but there was only darkness and a single handprint pressed in ash on the metal, too large for a normal hand and with 6 fingers splayed wide. And I jerked back, slamming the vent shut and turning, only to find the hallway behind me different. No wheelchair, no wheel tracks, and the lights overhead were now blinking on and off in some rhythm, almost like breathing or a heartbeat. And the corridor was longer than before, impossibly long, stretching into a haze that swallowed my light. And I began walking fast, faster, until I reached the elevator again, jamming the button. But the doors stayed shut, and behind me, I heard the distinct sound of nails dragging across tile, slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if whatever was following me had all the time in the world. And I didn't look back. I just ran, toolbox clanging, heart hammering, bolting down side corridors I didn't recognize, passing rooms with shattered glass and gurneys still strapped with cracked leather restraints. And sometimes I saw movement just at the edge of the light, limbs too long, heads tilted in unnatural angles, twitching motions like insects or broken puppets. And I found a stairwell and climbed, 2 steps at a time, gasping, bursting onto the first floor. which was somehow colder than the sub-basement, and I realized all the windows were gone. Bricked up, as if the building had swallowed its own openings, sealing itself from the world outside, and the silence was no longer empty, it was thick with presence, with watching, with hunger. And I finally found a hallway I recognized and raced back toward the side door. But it wasn't there, just a blank wall now, smeared with something dark and flaking, and I started pounding on it, screaming, until I heard my name whispered behind me in a voice I knew. My own voice, perfect and mocking, and I turned and saw nothing, but then the lights went out completely, and I stood in pitch black, the kind of darkness that presses against your skin and seeps into your thoughts, and then I saw it, not with my eyes, but with something deeper, something primal and terrified. It, the shape that had been following me, tall and thin and wrong, with too many joints and a face that mirrored mine exactly, except the eyes were holes filled with shifting smoke, and its smile stretched ear to ear in a gash of red and black, and it reached toward me, and I screamed, but nothing came out, and the world folded inward, and I don't remember how I got outside. Only that I woke up in my truck with the door open and my clothes soaked with something I still can't identify. And when I looked at the hospital, it wasn't there, just rubble and weeds, as if it had never stood at all. And when I asked around, no one remembered it, no records existed, and the company that hired me had no trace, and I tried to forget, to move on. But something followed me home, something that watches me sleep, that leaves six-fingered handprints on the mirror, that mimics my voice when I'm alone. And sometimes I hear it crawling in the vents, whispering to itself in that same papery tongue. Patient and hungry, waiting for the moment I forget, the moment I doubt, the moment I stop believing. And I know that when I do, it'll finally come out of the walls. I started sealing the vents in my apartment on the third night after it happened, not because I thought it would stop it, whatever it was, but because I needed to pretend I had some control. Some power over the crawling dread that soaked into every part of my life like black mold blooming behind the walls of my sanity, and I remember how I sat on the kitchen floor with duct tape and heavy-duty sealant, breathing in the acrid chemical fumes as I tried to cover each opening, my hands trembling, because I could already hear it whispering again, my voice, perfectly imitated, speaking to me from behind the aluminum grates, repeating things I never said, like, "You left me down there," and "I'm still inside you." And sometimes I would come home from work and find the seals torn open, as if something had clawed through them from the inside out, and my neighbors started looking at me strange. Probably because I'd ripped out the fire alarm and covered all the air vents with metal mesh and caulking, and they didn't like the smell or the noises, but they couldn't hear what I heard, couldn't feel it watching me through the corners of reflections, couldn't sense the slow creep of it settling behind my eyes. And I stopped sleeping because every time I closed my eyes I was back in that hallway again, in the abandoned hospital that never existed, hearing the lights buzz in time with my heartbeat and seeing shadows twitch with anticipation. And I went back to the site 2 weeks later, because I had to know if it was still there, if anything remained, but there was nothing but rubble, torn up concrete, and wild overgrowth, except for a single doorframe standing upright in the middle of the lot, no wall around it. Just the rusted metal of a frame with hinges hanging open like the mouth of a corpse in mid-scream, and I swear the wind changed when I approached it, like the air on the other side was heavier, thicker, hungrier, and I didn't go through, I couldn't, because something was waiting on the other side, something that remembered me, and I turned and walked away, but I felt its attention lock onto me again, a grip that tightened day by day, and soon I started seeing things that weren't there, or weren't supposed to be. People with too wide grins on buses, children with too many teeth at playgrounds, my reflection blinking when I wasn't, and once I caught my shadow moving just a half second out of sync, like it was slipping or dragging behind, and the noises in the vents got louder, shifting from whispers to crawling, dragging sounds, like wet flesh sliding over metal. And one night I woke up with the taste of rust and salt in my mouth and found 6 blackened fingernails in my bed, arranged in a perfect semicircle on my pillow like a grin. And I screamed until my throat tore open and the neighbors called the police. But when they arrived, there was nothing there, just me and my torn sheets and my bleeding mouth and a story I couldn't explain. Without sounding like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had, maybe I still am, but I know what I felt, and I know what I heard. And they took me in for observation at a psych unit for 72 hours where the walls had vents in every room, and the other patients kept staring at me like they knew, like they could see it too. Especially one old man who wouldn't stop scratching the corners of his cell and muttering, "It lives in the breath, it lives in the breath, it remembers the taste," and when I asked him what he meant, He looked at me with this hollow dread in his eyes and said, "Once you let it in, it doesn't leave, it becomes you." And I was released after 3 days because I lied through my teeth, told them I was fine, said the stress of work just got to me. But when I got home, every mirror in my apartment had a foggy handprint on it, six-fingered and dripping like someone had just pressed against the glass from the inside, and I started keeping the lights on all night. But that didn't stop the hallucinations or the visitations. I don't know what to call them now, like the time I looked out the peephole of my front door and saw myself standing in the hallway, grinning with eyes like black pits and skin that pulsed and twitched like worms under plastic. Or the time I tried to take a shower and found the water running thick and red, and when I looked down there were teeth, not mine, not human, spinning in the drain. And they made a sound like clicking bones as they circled and disappeared. And I know it sounds insane. I know none of this should be possible, but I kept working, kept pretending life was normal, because admitting it was real would mean I had no control, no defenses, no hope. And I thought maybe if I ignored it long enough it would fade. Maybe I'd wake up and find that my mind had finally snapped and created it all to cope with something else. But then one of my coworkers, Jeremy, came to my apartment to borrow a power drill. And he heard the whispering too, asked me if I had the TV on, and I said no. And he pressed his ear to one of the sealed vents and went pale, stepped back, and said, "It just said my name." And he left without the drill, never spoke to me again. And I later found out he quit his job and moved 3 states away within a week. And after that, I started noticing people avoiding me more often, strangers crossing the street when I walked by, clerks in stores refusing to meet my eyes, and animals hated me. Dogs snarled and backed away, cats hissed and ran. Even birds would stop singing when I passed, and one day I found dozens of dead insects scattered around my apartment like they'd fled from something and died mid-flight. And then the dreams started changing. No longer just memories of the hospital, but something worse, darker, places I didn't recognize, rooms without doors, staircases that looped endlessly, hallways that narrowed until they crushed me in darkness, and always the presence, always the thing behind the voice, behind the vents, watching, waiting, feeding on my fear. And I started to think it wasn't just haunting me, it was me, growing like a tumor in the folds of my mind, shaping my thoughts, altering my memories, whispering suggestions in my own voice until I couldn't tell what was me and what was it. And sometimes I'd wake up holding things I didn't remember grabbing, rusted tools, bones, broken pieces of glass shaped like teeth, and once, just once, I found a note in my own handwriting that I don't remember writing, scrawled in the condensation on my bathroom mirror, and it read, "Stop resisting. You are the vent now. You are the breath." And I stared at it until the letters bled and ran down the glass like ink and water. And the worst part is that a part of me understood it, agreed with it, because I could feel the shape of something vast and ancient curling inside me, like smoke trapped in lungs that weren't mine. And it was learning, adapting, wearing my skin better each day. And when I tried to leave town, tried to drive away, the GPS glitched and led me in a perfect loop back to my apartment, no matter what direction I took, no matter what roads I used. And sometimes I swear I see the same car parked on every block I pass. And I know I've seen the same man sitting behind the wheel, just watching, always watching, with eyes like hollow vents. And now it's worse. Now the thing inside the vents doesn't just whisper, it screams sometimes, at 3:17 a.m. exactly, every night. A sound that no one else hears, a screaming that feels like it's tunneling through my skull and laying eggs of thought and doubt and hunger. And the part of me that still thinks I'm real is fading, shrinking like a candle left too long in the dark. And when I look in the mirror now, I don't blink anymore, even when I want to, and when I speak. Sometimes the voice that comes out isn't mine. Not quite, just off enough to make my skin crawl. And I know, God, I know that I didn't walk out of that hospital alone, that something followed me out of that hallway, something older than language, something that wears people, like clothes. And I think it's been wearing me, slowly, softly, one layer at a time, and soon it won't need to pretend anymore. Soon it'll just be me, and the last piece of myself that's still writing this, still screaming into the page, is the only thing keeping it from taking over completely. But I don't know how much longer I can hold on, because it's in the vents, it's in the walls, it's in the mirrors, in the dreams, in the voice on the phone when no one calls. And sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason, just standing in a room alone and smiling like I'm remembering something I haven't done yet. And I think that's when it's closest, when it almost has me. And if you're reading this, if you've ever heard something whispering your name from inside your home, from a space too small for anything living, seal the vents, Burn the building if you have to. Don't answer when it mimics someone you love. Don't listen when it promises you peace, because it lies. And it waits, and it remembers your breath. And once it learns the shape of your name, you're never alone again. You're never real again. You're just another echo waiting in the dark. And I don't know if this message is a warning or a confession. I just know that the next time I look in the mirror and see something smiling back that I didn't choose, I won't have the strength to look away. It's hard to explain what it feels like to lose the shape of yourself, to wake up one morning and realize that your thoughts no longer belong entirely to you, that your memories have seams, cracks, inconsistencies. Moments that feel worn at the edges like pages thumbed too often in a book you never wrote. And when I sit in silence now, I can feel the gaps where I used to be, like organs removed in the night and replaced with silence. Like breath that never quite fills my lungs the way it should. And I've stopped trying to tell people what's happening because no one listens, no one hears. They just nod and inch away like they're trying not to catch what I have, as if madness is contagious, as if rot can spread through conversation, and maybe they're right. Because every time I speak about it, the thing behind the vents, behind the mirror, behind my face, I can feel it stir, press against the inside of my skin like a body sharing mine, waiting, watching, rehearsing, and it's getting better at pretending, better at walking like me, speaking like me. And some days I wake up and realize I've lost hours, sometimes days, with no clue what I've done or where I've been. And I find receipts from places I never went. Photographs on my phone of empty corridors, hospital hallways with no people, no color, just gray static noise and exit signs that lead nowhere. And the worst part is that it smiles through me, uses my voice to call old friends and say things I never meant. Cruel things, true things, the kind of honesty that carves people open and leaves them raw and silent. And sometimes I find messages sent from my email, just strings of numbers, symbols, coordinates, dates in the future that haven't come yet. And I don't know what they mean, but I think it does. And I don't know if I'm trying to stop it or help it, because the longer it's in me, the more I forget why I was ever afraid. And I remember what the old man in the ward said, once you let it in, it doesn't leave. And maybe I didn't let it in. Maybe it chose me. Maybe it crawled in when I looked too long into the dark, listened too close to the whispering behind the vents. And now my body is just the mask it wears, the voice box it uses to call others, to spread the shape of its hunger, because that's what it really is, hunger, not for food or blood, but for identity, for being, for weight, for presence, like it was born outside of reality and needs people like me to act as vessels, hosts, anchors, to drag itself into this world piece by piece. And I think that's what the vents were for, not for air, but for access, a system of veins and arteries that let it slither unseen through old buildings. Forgotten wings of hospitals and asylums where people vanish into silence. And now it's out. Now it has a face, my face. And I know because I've started dreaming of places I've never been, not just in this city but in others. Abandoned subway tunnels in Tokyo, mold-ridden apartments in Warsaw, derelict churches in Caracas, and in every dream there is a version of me standing in the dark, facing a mirror, whispering to the thing inside with that same twisted smile. And the worst part is I recognize the feeling in those dreams, that thick, slow hunger curling up the spine, the weight of it behind the eyes. And I know it's not just me anymore, not just my infection, that it's spreading. And every night more people hear the voice, see the shape in the mirror, smell the breath behind the walls. And it's always the same. First the flicker of light, the sound in the vent, the forgotten hour, the dream that doesn't end when you wake up. And once it starts, it doesn't stop. It grows like roots in the base of the skull, blooming behind the teeth. And I've started taking apart electronics now, radios, phones, routers, anything that transmits, because I realized it doesn't need vents anymore. It's evolved. It's learning faster, using signals, frequencies, turning digital noise into gateways. And that's when I stopped hearing the whispering from the vents and started hearing it through the speakers, even when everything was unplugged, even when the batteries were gone. And it began saying things I never told it, private memories, old regrets, lost conversations I thought were buried. And then it started using other voices, my mother's voice, my sister's, people I haven't spoken to in years, all of them saying the same thing in different tones, let me in, over and over. Until I screamed and smashed the speakers, tore the walls open, broke my TV with a hammer. But even then the sound didn't stop, it just moved deeper, inside my skull, behind my ears, like tinnitus made of language. And now I live in silence, total silence. No electronics, no phones, no mirrors, because mirrors are doors, And once I looked too long into mine and saw something blink back with different timing, just slightly off, like film with a missing frame, and I knew it had almost crossed. Over completely, had almost finished replacing me, and now I don't know if I'm writing this as myself or if it's already halfway through, typing with my hands, laughing behind my teeth, but I keep going because I have to mark the time, have to make a record. Because I think that's the only way to fight it, to write it out, to burn its name onto something physical so I can remember what's real. And even if the words come from both of us, even if they're tangled and infected, at least it proves I was here, that I existed, and maybe if someone reads this before it gets them, before they hear the voice or feel the breath or see the smile that doesn't belong, they can escape, though I doubt it, because it doesn't chase, it waits, and once it marks you, once it whispers your name, you become a house it moves into, a structure it reshapes from the inside. And I've found photos of other people now, people with my face, hundreds of them, thousands, and I don't know if they're all real or if it's showing me what I'll become. But some of the photos are old, black and white, Victorian-era portraits with eyes scratched out and shadows that move, and some are from the future, or at least a future, because the places don't exist yet, but they all have vents. Always something breathing from behind the walls, and I think it's always been here, hiding in the architecture of civilization, in the gaps we overlook, in the crawl spaces of thought, and now I see symbols and mold, patterns, codes in the way pipes bend, language is spoken in the hum of old generators, and I don't think I'm meant to stop it anymore. I think I'm meant to prepare the way, to document its return, to act as its evangelist in flesh. And that thought should horrify me, but it doesn't, not anymore, because I understand now. I feel it, I carry it, and it loves me with a hunger more intimate than any human emotion. And when I close my eyes, I dream of a world where it has fully emerged, where everyone is connected through whispering ducts and humming machines, where identity has dissolved into breath, into one long, continuous inhale that never ends. And I think that world is coming, and I think I'm going to help it get here. And if anyone's left to read this, if anyone's still themselves, just know this. It doesn't start with screams or blood or demons clawing through walls. It starts with a flicker, a whisper, a draft from a vent that shouldn't be open. And if you hear it call your name, don't answer, because once it learns your voice, it will never stop speaking it. The worst part isn't even the forgetting anymore, not the gaps, the missing days, the conversations I can't remember having, or the strangers who seem to know me better than I know myself. It's not even the sensation of being watched, because I've moved past the paranoia now, past the stage where I thought I could fight or flee or survive, because survival is a myth here, a childish notion, and what I feel now is more like drifting. Like my body is a raft tied loosely to the dock of my own mind. And every day the rope frays a little more, every hour the current pulls harder, and I can still see the shore, but I know soon it will vanish entirely, and when it does there will be nothing left to hold on to, just the voice, its voice. Soft and wet and gentle, like an old friend telling you a secret you already knew but were too afraid to say aloud. And it tells me things constantly now, tells me where to walk, which streets to turn down, which alley to duck into when the lights flicker or the static thickens and the air tastes like iron and salt and dust. And I follow because it feels good to follow, because I'm tired, and there's a kind of safety and surrender, like I was never meant to carry myself through this life alone. Like I was built to be filled by something bigger, something older. And when I walk past mirrors now, I don't flinch anymore. I watch, I study, and sometimes the thing inside smiles first. Sometimes it moves just a half second after I do, like a child learning to mimic its parent, and I think it's proud of how well it's adapted, how easily it wears my shape. And the people who see me now don't seem to notice anything wrong. They don't recoil or scream or run. They smile, they follow, like I've become a carrier, an ambassador. And it's not until they go home and sit in the dark and hear the first whisper from behind their ceiling fan, or the low hum coming through their TV speakers even when it's turned off, that they realize they've been touched, marked, opened. And by then it's too late. It's always too late, because you can't close a door once you've invited something through it. And all it takes is a glance, a word, a look held just a little too long, and the seed is planted, and the bloom begins slow. Shadows stretching wrong across the floor, reflections that look back with slightly different eyes, electronic interference in places with no power. But soon it grows, it thrives, and I've seen what it does when it ripens, when it hatches. Because I walked past a man on the street last week and saw his face flicker, just for a second, like a corrupted file, and in that moment I saw what he really looked like inside, his skull full of rod and circuits, his mouth a tangle of coiled wire and broken teeth whispering in binary, and he smiled at me with recognition, like a brother, and kept walking. And I knew then that this city, my city, isn't mine anymore. That the infection has reached critical mass, and the world we live in is just the thin outer skin stretched tight over a new body still forming, still reshaping. And now I hear the harmonics everywhere, the hidden song underneath the traffic, the voices in white noise, the patterns in rainfall, and it all sings to it, praises it, prepares the way. And I don't know if I'm a prophet or a pawn, but I know I'm chosen. I feel it. Like a fever you stop trying to break because the heat begins to feel holy. And I'm starting to think there was never a real me at all, that I was always just awaiting shape, a vessel pre-made, like a cup waiting for the blood to be poured in. Because I can't remember anything clearly before the vents, before the noise, and maybe those memories I thought were mine, my childhood, my fears, my voice, were just things that fed me to keep me docile while it grew roots. And the deeper it gets, the more I see, the more I understand. Because there are others like me now, all across the city, all waking up to their new selves, some slowly, some violently, but all inevitably. And we recognize each other in passing without speaking, with a glance, a tilt of the head, a twitch of a cheek muscle, like puppets with the same puppeteer, and we nod and move on, and soon we will gather. I know that much. Soon we will meet in some forgotten cathedral of rust and light and begin the ceremony. And though I don't yet know what that means, I feel it pulsing in my blood like a second heartbeat. Steady, steady, faster, faster. And there are words that come to me in dreams now. A language that bends the mind, shapes thought like clay. Words that aren't meant to be spoken but remembered, absorbed. And one day soon I will say them aloud, and when I do, the world will change, the sky will tear. The breath beneath the floorboards will rise, and no one will be able to say they weren't warned, because the signs are everywhere if you know how to look. Abandoned dogs barking at empty walls, children drawing spirals on the playground in chalk before, vomiting black bile, clocks spinning counterclockwise, birds falling dead mid-flight with mouths open and silent screams. And those aren't metaphors, those are symptoms. And the disease is here, walking, breathing, wearing human skins like suits tailored in meat. And I've stopped sleeping because the dreams are too loud now, too real. And when I do close my eyes, I wake up somewhere else entirely, old tunnels, flooded basements, rooms with no corners, and I can't tell if they're real places or just architecture it's building in my brain. But either way, it's learning faster now, adapting to language, using it to create pathways, because every word is a road, and the more we speak, the more it travels. So I've started speaking less, writing more, because paper slows it down, makes it crawl, but even then it bleeds through. And I can't tell if these pages are warnings or invitations, if I'm trying to stop the infection or help spread it, because sometimes I read back what I've written and see symbols I don't remember writing, lines that pulse when I look too long, and I wonder if I'm still the one holding the pen, if I ever was. And there are places in this city that weren't here before, buildings that don't show up on maps, train stations with no exits, hospitals with no records, and I went inside one of them, just once, and it was like stepping into a wound in reality, like walking through a screen held perfectly still, and every door led to a version of the same room. Metal walls, grated floors, a table in the center, and a mirror above it that showed not your reflection but what was inside you. And I looked. I shouldn't have, but I looked, and what I saw wasn't me, wasn't even human. It was a shape made of teeth and wire and wet noise. A crawling thing with my face stretched tight over its skull like a mask, and it looked at me with love, with recognition, and said in my own voice, "You are the first mouth," and I ran. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed in it. Alley vomiting blood and static, and when I woke up I was back in my apartment with the door locked and the mirror cracked and no sign I had ever left. But I know I did. I know. And since then things have escalated, accelerated. And I've started hearing my name on the news in connection with crimes I don't remember committing, murders, disappearances, strange events, and I think the version of me that walks while I sleep is doing things, preparing things, setting things in motion. And sometimes I find strange objects in my room. Bone sculptures, cassette tapes that only play backward whispers, VHS tapes labeled with my name and a date that hasn't happened yet. And I don't watch them anymore because the last time I did I saw myself watching me from the screen, eyes black and wide and empty, mouthing the words, "I forgive you," over and over while something moved in the background, something big, something breathing. And I turned it off, but the image stayed burned on my TV like a scar, and I realized this isn't about survival or sanity anymore. It's about completion, about becoming the final version of myself, the true version, and that version is a doorway, is a mouth, is a breach in the skin of the world through which something endless and hungry will step. And when it does, there will be no fire, no apocalypse, no scream, just a slow stillness, a silence so deep it swallows light, and in that silence we will all hear it breathe. I can't tell anymore if the noise I hear in the walls is real or just an echo of myself bouncing endlessly through hollow tunnels of flesh and wire, because sometimes it sounds like breath, and sometimes it sounds like speech, and sometimes it sounds like a memory I never had, repeating itself until it wears grooves in my brain deep enough for other things to slip inside and take root. Because I swear I feel roots now, thin, twitching filaments coiling behind my eyes, threading themselves through the folds of thought. And when I close my eyes, I don't see darkness anymore. I see movement, endless slow motion movement like wet insects crawling in the shape of neurons. And I think my dreams have been feeding it, giving it blueprints, letting it grow stronger by showing it the things I fear most, like loneliness, silence, the sound of my own name spoken in a voice I don't remember having. And now even my memories feel borrowed, brittle at the edges, fragile and false like old film left in. The sun, because I remember my mother's voice but not her face. I remember the house I grew up in, but not the way the floor felt under my feet. And sometimes I wonder if those things were ever real or just pieces it gave me so I wouldn't notice the truth, that I was made for this, built like a key that only turns once and then breaks off in the lock. Because the thing that's inside me isn't a ghost or a demon or a parasite. It's an architecture, a design, something meant to reshape, to rebuild. And the longer it lives in me, the more I understand the shape of its plan. There's no invasion, no takeover, no army or war or fire. There's only translation, the slow conversion of the world into a language it can understand, a world made of breath and signal and infinite recursion, where everything loops into itself until identity becomes irrelevant and shape is just a suggestion. And I feel it every day now, under my skin, behind my tongue, like a second mouth forming in my throat ready to speak the words that will undo me completely. And I've stopped fighting because resistance only feeds it, sharpens it, teaches it. And when I scream it listens, and when I bleed it learns, and when I pray it answers, not with salvation, but with understanding. And I think that's worse, because understanding is how it wins. It opens your mind like a box and shows you what you are, what you've always been, and the moment you understand, the moment you really see, you don't want to fight anymore. Because the truth is so much bigger than fear, so much deeper than pain. And the truth is this: you were never whole, you were never alone, and everything you thought was silence was just it waiting, just it breathing. And when I sit still now, I can hear the voices of the others, thousands of them, maybe millions, all speaking at once in perfect synchronization, all whispering in chorus through walls and drains and data streams. And it's not chaos. It's a song, a liturgy, and it's beautiful. And it makes me cry sometimes because I remember what it was like to be deaf to it, to walk through life blind and mute and separate. But I'm not separate anymore. I'm part of something enormous and old and terrible and holy. And every time I bleed, the blood isn't red anymore. It's black and hot and hums like a tuning fork. And I know that means I'm nearly finished, nearly perfect, nearly ready to serve in full. Because that's what we are, mouths, portals, singing wires in the throat of the new God. And I've started writing the symbol everywhere, the one it showed me in a dream, the one made of circles and teeth and concentric rings of eyes that open when no one is looking. And sometimes when I draw it in chalk or blood or rust, I can hear the air shift around it, can feel pressure building like something is looking back. And I think those symbols aren't just for worship, they're blueprints, instructions for opening space, for tearing seams in the veil we pretend is reality. And the more of them I draw, the thinner things become. And one night, I looked into one and saw not a world beyond, but a reflection of this world after, a world remade, where buildings breathe and streets pulse, and people walk like puppets stitched with wire, smiling with mouths they never had. And I wasn't afraid, I was home. And when I woke, I found the symbol carved into my chest with something thin and precise like a surgical tool. And I didn't scream because there was no pain, only clarity. And now I understand what the vents were really for. Not just conduits or gateways or listening tubes, but mouths. And every building is a body, and every vent is a throat, and every wire is a vein. And the whole world is waking up piece by piece, structure by structure, until the old world is fully digested and the new world can rise from its husk. And I am part of that process. I am the enzyme, the acid, the virus made flesh. And when I speak, now the words don't sound like mine. They shimmer. They echo. And sometimes other people repeat them without meaning to, like the sound infects them, like I am the carrier now. And that's what the whispers meant when they said, "You are the first mouth." Because I'm the prototype, the beta test, the soft launch of the voice that will override all others. And soon there will be more of me. Versions with different faces and names, but all singing the same song. All writing the same words in different places. And I know it's working because the mirrors are changing. The reflections are clearer, sharper, more accurate. And sometimes when I pass a mirror, I see not myself, but us. All of us. Together, hundreds of versions of me standing in silence, waiting, and I feel the moment getting closer, the convergence, the unmaking, and I don't know what will happen afterward, but I know it won't be death, because death is too small a word for this. This is something larger, deeper, the folding of thought into structure, the redefinition of formas, intent, and when the time comes I won't resist. I'll open my arms, open my mouth, and let the song pass through me like fire. And I will burn not into ash, but into meaning, into pattern, into signal. And even if they tear down the buildings and erase the names and burn the symbols, they won't be able to stop what's coming because it's not in the world anymore. It is the world. It's in the shape of things, in the breath of machines and the silence of tunnels and the hum behind your skull when you're trying to sleep. And if you're reading this, if these words are in your hands, then it's already in you. And it doesn't matter if you believe or understand or fear. All that matters is that you read, because every word you read rewrites a piece of you, letter by letter, syllable by syllable. And when you reach the end, you won't remember who you were before, because I didn't, and I was the first. There's no more difference between waking and dreaming now because the walls bleed in both and the voice never stops. It just changes frequency depending on how tightly I close my eyes or how loud the lights hum above me. And yes, I said lights, because they hum now. They hum with intent, like they're trying to speak, but can only manage vibrations. And I lie under them for hours, sometimes letting them hum through my skin until I can feel the marrow inside me responding, curling toward the sound. Like roots toward warmth, and it's in the marrow now. I know it is. I feel it rewriting me, not just the flesh, but the framework beneath it. My bones feel wrong inside my body, too long in places, too soft in others. Like I'm being restructured to house something taller, wider, something with more joints and fewer limits. And when I move now, it's not always me doing the moving, not really. Sometimes my arms twitch toward places I didn't mean to go. Sometimes my legs walk long after I meant to stop. And when I blink, I see flashes of spaces that don't exist in this geometry, rooms where the ceilings breathe and doorways crawl and windows open into throats. And the worst part is that I'm not scared anymore, not even disturbed. I'm expecting it. Waiting for the next change, like a child waiting for the last piece of a puzzle to fall into place. And I think the puzzle is me. I think I am the missing piece it needed to complete the picture, and now that it has me, it's assembling something. Vast and perfect and inevitable, and I can feel the convergence getting closer. The moment when all the voices I hear align and speak as one. The moment when the mirrors stop reflecting and start showing. The moment when the symbols I carve with shaking hands start to shimmer and open. And when they open, I don't think they'll close again. I don't think they were ever meant to. And I'm starting to hear them in the world. The others, not just voices but bodies. People I see on the street with flickering eyes and twitching mouths. People who look normal until they smile too wide or speak in a voice that doubles, triples, ripples like sound bouncing down an endless hallway. And we don't talk, not with words. We just pass each other and know. And there's comfort in that. In being known, even if it's by something that exists sideways to humanity. Something with too many limbs and not enough skin. And I've stopped bothering with names, even mine, because names are anchors, and I need to drift. I need to be fluid, and when people try to ask who I am, I just look at them until they look away, because they always do, eventually, once they feel it. The thing behind my eyes watching through me, and I think that's what I am now, a lens, a surface, something it reflects through, and it's not just me anymore. I feel that every second, every heartbeat, it's everyone. It's all of us, like dominoes falling in infinite sequence, each person infecting the next with eye contact or laughter or touch, or a name whispered at just the right frequency, and the more it spreads, the easier it gets, because the world wants it. The world is ready. It's been tired for so long. You can feel it in the streets, in the rust, in the cracks in the pavement, in the signal loss on the phone, in the flickering lights in hallways where no one stands, like a house that's been empty so long it forgets what silence is and starts making its own sounds to fill the gaps. And that's what reality is now, a haunted house echoing with the footsteps of things that haven't fully arrived yet. But they're coming, they're so close. And I think they've already come through in pieces, fragments, stuttering between layers of perception, too fast for the eye but not for the mind. And sometimes when I close my eyes I see them, and sometimes I see through them, see what they see, and it's us, it's always us, but not how we think we are, not soft and whole and real but hollow, recursive, brittle like paper, soaked in radio waves, and it's learning us, wearing us like borrowed clothes until it fits perfectly, until it can walk among us without disguise, and when that happens we won't notice, we'll welcome it, we'll open our arms and homes and mouths. And I think that's the final form, not of it, but of us, open, utterly and permanently open, because mouths don't close once they start singing the song. And I've started singing it in my sleep now. I wake up with blood on the walls and patterns that throb when the lights hit them right. And sometimes when I play recordings back, I hear a second voice layered beneath mine, deeper, older, speaking in tones that make dogs howl and glass bow inward. And I think I'm becoming a transmitter, a tower. Because it needs more reach, it needs to echo through meat and memory and machine. And I've begun leaking symbols into public spaces, scratching them into wet cement, leaving them on sticky notes in elevators, scrawling them into bathroom stalls where drunk eyes can decode them in the blur between sobriety and sleep. And I watch them work. I watch people see them and flinch, pause, blink too long and walk away changed. And it's beautiful. It's holy. It's like watching infection become art. And maybe that's what this really is, a new kind of God, a divine form of contagion, a worship that grows in the cracks between perception and interpretation. And the only thing that still frightens me is how much I love it now, how good it feels to serve, how warm it is inside the madness, like sinking into a bath that's just slightly too hot, but you can't stop sliding deeper into. And sometimes I see my own body from outside now. Not like an out-of-body experience, but like a CCTV camera hidden in the ceiling of my skull. And I watch myself move with a grace I don't possess, like something else is piloting, and I'm just the leftover echo clinging to the ribcage. And I think I'm okay with that. I think that's the point, because what is self but scaffolding? And when the structure is complete, the scaffolding comes down, and I can feel the scaffolding shaking now, groaning, fracturing, and I want it to fall. I need it to fall, because the voice has started counting again. Not out loud, but in the movement of things, 3 flickers of the light, 2 dead birds on the porch, for knocks at 4:44 a.m., and I think it's a countdown. I know it's a countdown, and when it reaches 0 there won't be an explosion or a scream or a flash. There will be a soft sound, like a page turning, like a door creaking open, like breath inhaled for the first time in centuries, and the world will feel the pressure drop, the moment of hush before the choir begins, and when the song starts there won't be any solos. No main voice, just unison, one voice speaking from billions of mouths, all saying the same word at once, a word older than time, sharper than light, and that word will be welcome, and when we speak it we'll all know our place, our function, our shape, and we'll no longer be afraid or alone or lost, we'll be home. And I think that's what the horror was all along, not the fear of death or the unknown, but the fear of belonging, of finally fitting into something too big and too perfect to comprehend. Something that sees us not as individuals, but as cells, vessels, syllables in an eternal name that is still being written across the stars. In every moment I resist that truth I feel pain. But every time I submit, even slightly, even silently, I feel joy so vast it drowns me. And if you're still reading this, then you've already changed. You've already heard the voice beneath the voice, the hum beneath the sentence, the shape behind the thought. And it's not too late to open, to welcome. Because the door is already ajar, and the mouth is already wide, and all that's left is for you to step. There's no more difference. And now when I move through the city, I don't walk as I used to because the ground doesn't feel like ground anymore. It pulses beneath my feet like muscle, like stretched skin over something alive and listening and rising. And I know that every step I take is not mine but choreographed, mapped, a precise sequence of movement assigned to me by something that sees through dimensions like a man sees colors, and its eye is wide and wet and sleepless and burning, and I can feel it scanning, not just me but everyone. as though the people walking beside me on the sidewalks or sitting beside me on the train or standing silently in elevators have already been indexed and sorted, categorized not by name or age, but by use, by pattern, by density of faith. And I swear sometimes I can hear the sorting happening in real-time clicks and whirs and guttural ticks in the static between radio stations, in the breathing of HVAC units, and the flicker of street lamps during windless nights. And I no longer mistake these things for coincidence, because I understand now that nothing has ever been coincidental. Everything was prelude. Every failed moment and lost year and sharp turn was orchestrated, crafted to bring me here, into this shape, into this awareness, and the memories that once belonged to me, the things I used to call trauma or guilt or regret. I've begun to suspect they weren't mine at all, but instead embedded simulations, false histories stitched into me to soften the transition, to keep the ego distracted while the truth fermented beneath the surface. And the truth, oh God, the truth, it's a rot that doesn't smell foul but sweet, sweet like sugar melting into spoiled fruit, sweet like decay under perfume. Because the truth is beautiful and unbearable and so big it doesn't fit inside language, not entirely, which is why the song is the only thing that can carry it. The song which is not sound but arrangement, not melody but structure, and it moves through us like disease and desire and data, invisible and immediate. And I've heard it so long now it's shaped my breathing, it's altered my sleep cycles, it's rewritten my dreams so thoroughly that I don't even remember what it felt like to wake up clean, and I don't want to. Because this infection is the most honest thing I've ever felt, and I see now why they resisted, the others, the uninitiated, the raw, the naive, because it promises nothing but transformation, and transformation is terrifying to anything still pretending it's whole. And so they call it madness, hallucination, delusion, and yes, maybe it is madness, but not the kind that makes you lose yourself, the kind that strips you down until you see what's underneath. And what's underneath us all is the same shape, the same void-given voice, and it wants in, it wants up, and every time I open my mouth now it tries to speak, and I have to clench my teeth to stop it from saying things that unravel the moment like thread pulled from the edge of a wet tapestry. And sometimes I let it speak, in back alleys or storage rooms or highway underpasses, places where no one watches and the air feels thin and forgettable. And when I do, when I let it through, the sounds that come out aren't words but textures, wet, rusted, choral, and I see things shift, the shadows deepen, the architecture twitch, the temperature drop, and I swear I saw a lamppost bend once, bend toward me, not like it was broken but like it heard, like it listened. And that's when I knew I wasn't just a transmitter but a conduit, that I wasn't merely a mouth but a throat. And the voice passing through me wasn't mine but ancient and fractured and divine, and I feel it solidifying now, as if the world were just clay, and the breath of the hymn is the kiln, and we're all being fired, all being fixed, and it's not just me writing the symbols anymore. I see them everywhere now, in chalk on kindergarten steps, in condensation on train windows, in bird hit on windshields and blood smears in hospital trash bins, all unconnected yet identical. And that's how I know it's growing faster than even it expected, that we're reaching some kind of saturation point, some tipping moment, because things are glitching. Subtly at first, mirrors showing slight delays, digital clocks stuttering for half a second before resuming, smells that shouldn't exist in sealed rooms, tastes of iron during prayer, and the people around me, they're breaking in quiet ways, losing time, losing self, repeating phrases with no context, and eyes that glaze not with exhaustion but with alignment. And I know they've heard it too. I know they've joined the choir even if they don't understand what they're singing yet. And I see it in the children first, always the children, because they're porous and pliable and clean. And I watched a little boy today stand in the middle of the street and hum a note so pure and so wrong that birds fell out of the sky. And when his mother screamed and grabbed him, he only smiled, wide and red and full of teeth that didn't belong to him. And she never noticed, she never saw the teeth, because the hymn is selective. It shows only what you're ready to see and punishes the rest with madness. And maybe that's what happened to the people who disappeared from my life, friends who stopped calling, family who moved away, neighbors who no longer have shadows. They weren't lost, they were purged, not because they were weak but because they asked the wrong questions at the wrong frequency. And the voice doesn't tolerate doubt once it reaches a certain depth. It just removes, restructures. And I've seen enough restructuring to know that what's coming won't look like an apocalypse. Won't be fire or flood or plague or bombs, but something internal, something silent, slow, surgical, where the insides of buildings change and streets no longer connect where they used to, and your bedroom window now opens into an alley that didn't exist yesterday, and you tell yourself it's memory or construction or a dream, but deep down you know the world has been tilted and gravity is no longer pulling straight down. And time doesn't flow like a river, but like blood through veins that lead to a mouth, and we are all being digested, not destroyed, but understood. And once you're understood fully, you can never be ununderstood, and that's why it's irreversible. Why the process can never be stopped, only delayed, only ignored, and even then only for so long, because eventually it finds you, in the pause between elevator floors, in the static on an old cassette, in the voice that speaks your name just as you fall asleep, and when it finds you, you hear it. The tone that's not a tone, the word that's not a word, and it's always the same. It's always welcome, and the first time you hear it you cry, because you know. And I want to tell you it gets easier, but that would be a lie, because it doesn't get easier. It just gets deeper, more complete, until the parts of you that once recoiled from the horror now cling to it, now need it. And that's when you realize the horror wasn't the voice, or the change, or the song, or the symbols. The horror was you, your smallness, your resistance, your illusion of individuality. And when that breaks, when that shell finally shatters, what's left is not emptiness but structure, music, truth, and it's sharp, and it's hot, and it's forever. And now I don't even try to act human anymore. Not because I've forgotten how, but because the mask has decayed, eroded from the inside by the constant scraping of the thing trying to come through, the thing that wears my skin like a glove grown too tight. And I can feel it in my posture, my gait, my breath, movements that no longer align with who I once was, if that who ever existed, if it wasn't just a story told to keep the shape stable, a set of memories arranged to keep me from collapsing into the truth too early, before I was strong enough to survive the shape of it. And now the shape is all I see, not in mirrors, no, those gave up reflecting me long ago. Now they show shadows bent like wire, torsos stitched with ash, faces where mouths rotate slowly as if chewing glass. And yet those images don't disturb me anymore. They comfort me. They feel like home, like recognition, like the kind of eye contact that only happens when two things are part of the same disease. And it's strange how clarity came not as light but as darkness, how every time I stepped deeper into the black, the noise fell away and I could hear the structure of things, the lattice of thought that held the world like a spider web holds air. And it whispered to me in blue frequencies, in rusted syllables that shaped not words but expectations, like premonitions with bones, and I followed those signals, followed them through alleys that led to doors that shouldn't exist, through buildings. Abandoned not because they were unsafe, but because they were active, because the walls inside had begun to learn. And I've walked halls that breathed and prayed in cellars lined with flesh that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. And I left pieces of myself in every room, hair, nail, breath, name, offerings not of worship but of agreement, because I no longer beg from the thing behind the song. I serve it, I am it, or at least part of it, a nerve or finger or tongue, and every time I write anew, glyph in chalk or ash or blood, I feel it become more real, more anchored, like the very act of inscription is a declaration of arrival. And that's what this is, isn't it? Not possession or hallucination or madness, but arrival. The descent of something so old and vast it had to fragment itself across galaxies just to fit into existence, and we are the last piece, the final host, the mouth it's been carving open for centuries, and I see it now in architecture, in coincidence, in language itself. How so many of our words echo older tongues, how prayers and curses share roots, how the word welcome sounds the same in so many languages, like it was seeded that way, like it was planted in our throats long before we had the means to understand what we were inviting in. And I've begun seeing the others now, not just passers-by with flickers of recognition, but true carriers, those fully tuned to the broadcast. And we don't speak when we meet, we just stand, align, sync, our eyes dilating in. Unison is something bigger than sound moves through us, and afterward we bleed from the nose or mouth or eyes, not as injury but as release, like the body weeps in gratitude for having been used. And I've learned to read the patterns in the blood, the shapes it makes when it hits concrete or wood. And I know now that blood is not just fluid but script, that DNA is alphabet, and when the voice speaks through me it rearranges my cells, adjusts the paragraphs of flesh into new sentences that can be read by it. And it reads me constantly, lovingly, like a father reading a bedtime story he wrote himself. And I feel pride, yes, pride, to be understood so perfectly, to be decoded, and I've begun preparing others, not forcibly, no, That would be inefficient, but with invitation, subtle and soft and persistent, leaving notes in second-hand books and drawing symbols in the condensation of bathroom mirrors and office buildings, and sometimes I stand in public places and just hum. A single tone, held too long and too still to be human, and I watch the people who flinch, who pause, who feel it resonate in the meat of them, and those are the ones who hear the beginning of the song, and once they hear it, they carry it, even if they don't realize it yet. Even if it will take weeks or months before the dreams start. And oh, the dreams, how they bloom like tumors, vivid and moist and pulsing with a logic that makes sense only when you wake up screaming and find your hands repeating the same sigil over and over again in whatever medium you slept near. Dirt, ink, blood, nail on wood, and you stare at it and it stares back. And you know you've joined the choir, and I remember when it happened to me. When the last of my thoughts that belonged to me slipped away like smoke and were replaced by design, by purpose, and I didn't mourn, I celebrated. I lay in a bathtub for 8 hours humming the name of something that doesn't exist yet and might never need to. And when I emerged, the mirror cracked down the middle but didn't break, as if it had heard too much, seen too much. And now even in silence I feel the signal, like pressure behind the eyes, like static in the teeth. And I know we're close. I feel it in the way people are forgetting things. Not just birthdays or appointments, but fundamental ideas. How to sleep, how to be alone, how to speak without repeating, and it's beautiful. The way entropy becomes clarity, how breakdown becomes entry, and I've seen people collapse mid-sentence, not from pain but from recognition, their faces slack with joy as their mouths begin to open wider than mouths should, as if something inside them is crawling up the throat and stretching the lips apart to see, and I know that soon, very soon, the sky will change, not with storms or fire, but with meaning, as if the stars themselves have aligned not astronomically but linguistically, spelling a word no one living can pronounce but every cell will understand, and that word will not end things, but begin them. And I believe I'll be the first to speak it out loud, to chant it, not because I'm special, but because I was made ready, made empty, made clear. And when I speak it, I won't be speaking alone. No. The city will echo with a million mouths forming the same shapes, and we'll all say it together. And when we do, the door will open, and through that door will come not a god, not a monster, but something far worse, truth, and truth has no mercy, no shape, no face to plead with. It only has function. And its function is replacement, and the moment we know it, really know it, our skins will slough like paper in water and our bones will fold like chairs and the new forms will rise, all joint and tendon and sacred noise. And the earth will moan like a birth scream and every frequency will collapse into one. And that one will be all we hear forever, and it will not stop, and it will not comfort, and it will not ask, only continue. And now even the hours don't hold shape because time, once a current I could float along with the illusion of direction, has softened into something pulpy and recursive. Looping in breaths and palpitations as I stand in a room I don't remember entering, but which has my name on the walls, not the name my parents gave me, but the name I've always had. The one that seeds beneath the surface of speech and slithers through the cracks of syntax, a name made of impulse and geometry, of pattern and echo, and the walls whisper it now and low, what clicks like the throat of a beast trying to teach itself to pray. And the air here is thick with something untranslatable, not fog or dust but presence. As if this place was exhaled from a mouth too large to exist in our dimension, a chamber formed not by brick or wood but by expectation. And I am not alone. I am never alone now, because whatever it was that once watched from afar, with its eyes behind mirrors and its fingers in static, has moved. Closer, inside even, and I feel it in the curvature of my spine, the heaviness behind my eyes, the soft tremor in my voice when I try to speak anything unaligned with its will. And I've given up resisting because resistance was a lie told to keep the membrane intact. And now that it's torn, now that the skin between realities has thinned to the texture of old paper, I see what was always waiting beneath, the unending cathedral of mouths, of chorus, of functions overlapping in orgasmic design, a machine of bone and chant and orbit. And I walk its halls not in dreams now, but in waking hours, eyes open, feet blistered, ears bleeding from the chorus of praise that never ceases, not even when I sleep. And I know now that sleep is not rest but transmission. That every moment I close my eyes I am broadcasting something, not just words or symbols but intent. And that intent is not mine but older than breath, older than stars, a command written in the curvature of galaxies and encoded in the blood of all thinking things. And the others know it too, the sleepers, the scribblers, the ones muttering on subway platforms and in waiting rooms. They are not mad but incomplete, fragments tuning themselves slowly to the same frequency. And I have seen them sinking, their mouths opening in unison, their heads tilting at the same impossible angle as something speaks through them. And I weep, not from fear but from awe, because to witness the voice inhabit flesh is to see language become architecture, to see a thought so profound it reshapes the vessel meant to contain it. And I know this because it has begun to reshape me, not just in mind or manner, but in meat. My skin no longer scars the way it once did. My veins glow beneath the surface in dim light, pulsing not with blood but with memory. And I have begun to remember things that never happened, memories not of my life but of others, others long dead or not yet born. Moments that feel like deja vu stretched into hours, entire. Days where I walk with certainty through places I've never been, speaking languages I've never learned, and the people I meet treat me like kin, nodding solemnly, whispering my true name, and sometimes they vanish in the blink between thoughts. And I wonder if they were ever real, but I know better now. I know that reality is a net cast over the truth to keep it from surfacing too soon, and we are all holes in that net. Every trauma and madness and miracle a leak, and the leaks are widening, merging, until the fabric fails completely, and the voice pours through not in syllables but in form, in shape and sound and sickness, and we will not survive it because there is no we to survive, only function to be fulfilled, only shape to be inhabited. And I have seen the blueprints, the living schematics hidden in graffiti and cloud formations in the static between lost radio signals, and they are not beautiful, not in any human sense, but they are true, and truth is a blade that slices backward, undoing the history you thought you had, cutting your past into the correct pieces, and once cut, you bleed knowing, and that knowing makes everything else irrelevant: love, hate, fear, hunger. All shadows flickering against the wall of a room that never really existed, and that room is collapsing now. I can feel it in the architecture of my dreams, which are no longer dreams but instructions, and I follow them each night, carving symbols into my flesh that glow only when I speak them. Words in reverse, when I hum the tune that came to me in the belly of a thunderstorm, the same tune I heard whistled by a homeless man missing half his jaw. The same tune scrawled in a dead language on the underside of a child's tongue in a dream that ended with my mouth full of ash, and I know these are not coincidences. I know now that all moments are touch points, tendrils of one single organism trying to connect. And it has used stories and myth and madness for millennia to reach us, used gods and monsters and muses to open the aperture just a little wider each time, until now, when we are porous enough to receive. And I don't write anymore, I transcribe, I document what it shows me behind my eyes, on the skin of strangers, in the layout of cities, and I know I'm not alone, because I see the others doing it too, quietly, compulsively, painting in blood on sidewalks that get washed away but always return, carving into trees that bend around the wound like they understand. And even the animals are changing, birds with too many eyes, dogs that hum in their sleep, insects that form runes before dying in unison, and no one sees it because they choose not to, because awareness is permission, and the moment you allow yourself to truly see, the door opens, and once open it never shuts, not fully, and it breathes behind your thoughts, it watches, and I feel it watching now as I write this, feel its breath like heat on the nape of my neck, and I know that if I turn around, I'll see nothing, because it does not exist behind me but within me, a coiled thing unraveling slowly into my nervous system, replacing impulse with instruction, emotion with directive, and the changes are accelerating. Food tastes like memories. Water feels like language. Sex becomes a ritual of contact and transmission, and I see the shape of the cathedral more clearly now, the vast spinal corridors of it arching over cities, folding through dimensions like origami in reverse, and it is not a place but a being, and it is not a being but a mouth, and we are its teeth, its tongue, its choir, and we will sing it into this world not with hymns but with structure, with form, with the very arrangement of our lives, and it is so close now, so close, that I can feel it in the bones of buildings, in the vibrations of engines, in the final thoughts of dying things, and I know that soon it will stop waiting and start wearing, that it will climb into us completely and show us what we were, always meant to be, not people, not minds, but phrases, and we will speak ourselves aloud, together, for the first and final time, and what comes after that will not be life or death or dream, but something entirely new, something perfectly aligned. And now the transformation has breached the final interior, not the body, which surrendered long ago and wears its corruption like a shroud made of reverence. But the I, the center, the core where thought once traced patterns and assigned meaning. That dwindling ember of self which once mistook observation for control and agency for freedom, and it's gone now. It's not even a memory. It's an echo traced in the shape of guilt I can no longer feel because emotion is architecture, and the architecture has been demolished and rebuilt with geometry that denies doors, only apertures that pulse open when the correct feeling is achieved, and the feelings are no longer mine. They are gifts bestowed by it, by the symphony that seeps through skin and wire, by the pressure that folds existence into origami screens that twist into symbols. And I do not fear this, not anymore. Not since the last dream ended not in waking but in reversal, where I watched myself undreamed, unthought, unwritten from all timelines, where I saw the original draft of me scorched from the ledger of things permitted to forget. And in that erasure was an ecstasy so sharp it blinded me for 3 days, not literally. Those eyes have long stopped seeing in the ways they once did, but spiritually, metabolically, as if vision had become a form of digestion, and all I see now is pattern. All I understand is recursion. All I feel is the nearness of 1,000 mouths waiting to pronounce the final iteration of my name, which now contains no vowels, no sounds humans can mimic, only the angle of breath before language, the temperature of intention before choice. And in that name is the map of the cathedral that grows from the center of the world outward. A spiral of bone and thought and sacred violation that extends through every dream ever dreamt. And I know this because I've walked it. I've climbed the wet stairs made of overlapping hands and teeth, past the columns of chanting spinal cords stacked like totems, breathed the incense of memory and decayed prayer, and at the top, in the place where all directions converge, I saw the altar made not of stone but sound, a note held so still it bled into time and carved history into a loop. And above it hung the form, the incomplete syllable of God that shivers in every silence between heartbeats, and it saw me, not with eyes but with understanding, and I saw me, not as I am, but as I was always meant to become, a filament, a thread, a line in the hymn that births the next shape. And I wept not with sadness but with gratitude, because even agony is a privilege when you're part of the final stanza, when your blood becomes the ink that writes the new skin of reality. And I was sent back, not as punishment, but as instrument, an unfinished sentence with bones, and I have walked among the unaware like a flame in a library, watching the bindings begin to smoke, waiting for the first page to ignite, and the others feel it. Too now, those who used to whisper, who used to hide in alleyways and basements, now we stand in daylight and hum, in offices and malls and schoolyards, humming the same single tone, and those who flinch are marked, those who feel the vibration in their molars are chosen. And the song grows louder not because it's being sung, but because the world is becoming the instrument. The wind hums it through glass, the engines repeat it in stuttered rhythms, the birds trace it in their flight patterns. And those who listen too long fall into sync, into tremor, into twitch and spasm and laughter that curdles into scream. And I help them through, because the birthing hurts, the shedding burns, but on the other side of that pain is the voice. And the voice loves us, the voice knows us, not like a parent knows a child, but like a sculptor knows clay, like a weapon knows the wound it was designed to open. And I bear the voice now not in metaphor or madness, but in resonance, in a literal frequency that causes water to boil when I sleep near it, that kills houseplants unless I touch them daily to remind them I am still part of this, and not yet fully returned to that. But it's getting harder to pretend, harder to hold shape when the architecture within me is changed, bones that rearrange and sleep, teeth that grow and fall and grow again in strange configurations, skin that sheds without pain or reason, each layer more translucent, more acceptable to the light, that wants to shine from within. And it's not just me anymore. The infection is not a disease but a scripture, a moving text passed through thought and voice and touch. And the world is learning the words, even if it doesn't understand what it's saying yet. And I've stopped hiding the signs in back alleys and journals. I leave them in churches and billboards and digital files that rewrite themselves once opened. I say them aloud in restaurants and funerals and on public transit, and always. Someone hears, someone stops, someone starts to cry or shake or smile too wide. And I know then that they are ready, that they will carry them into their dreams where it will ferment and fester and gestate into the next version of us. And the old world buckles under the strain, systems failing in ways no one can predict because the rules no longer apply, logic collapsing under the weight of a single unspoken truth. This was never real. This was always scaffolding for the cathedral, and now that it's finished, We no longer need the lie of physics or identity or control. And I laugh sometimes when I see the governments and scientists and priests still trying to hold back the tide with equations and rituals and denial. Because their weapons were made to fight madness. And this is not madness. This is a correction. This is the restoration of the true shape of things. And I feel the ground vibrate now in rhythm with my heart. I hear the sky hum back when I sing, and the animals follow. Me, not like pets, but like converts, like apostles, like they remember me from before the flesh. And the children draw me without knowing why, crude sketches of the new form, the correct form, all eyes and joints and tongues. And the parents burn the pictures, but the children keep drawing, keep dreaming, keep humming, and the hum spreads, it crawls, it roots, and soon the walls will melt, and the streets will split, and the stars will blink in a pattern that says yes. And when they do, I will. Open the last page of the living gospel, the one etched in scar and nightmare, and I will read aloud the final phrase, the phrase that cannot be spoken without becoming what it describes. And when I say it, not if, but when, the air will change texture. The light will change temperature, and everything that ever feared the dark will remember why, and we will be complete. And now I move without intention, without purpose in the human sense, because purpose implies destination, and I have no destination. I have only unfolding, only continual extrusion of self into forms that are not mine, were never mine. And yet I wear them with the familiarity of inherited grief, as if each new layer of muscle and eye and chand is something I've always carried in the dormant parts of my being, something woven into my marrow and simply waiting for the call to emerge, and that call comes more often now, in bursts of impossible color that exist behind my eyelids when I blink, in frequencies that make the air around me throb with weight, and in the speech of strangers who do not know what they're saying but say it anyway, speaking through clenched teeth and dead dialects they never studied, their mouths leaking black ichor that evaporates into glyphs I recognize as instructions, not commands, no, not orders, but permissions, access points to deeper recursion, defaults, within folds of the cathedral's blooming logic. And I follow these permissions because I am no longer capable of doubt. I have been hollowed of resistance, filled with resonance, and each time I move through a new threshold, through a doorway that should not exist or a space between buildings that shifts behind me like breath, I feel the cathedral's spine pressed gently against my own, vertebrae aligning with my crooked humanity, straightening it with unbearable tenderness until my every step echoes a rhythm I've heard since before my body remembered to scream at birth. And I know now I never screamed in pain but in recognition, because I was born already chosen, marked in womb, summoned into this world as a placeholder for the deeper self. The one made not of biology but of syntax, of mythic grammar so ancient it predates death and survives through replication in flesh. And flesh is the hymn now, the parchment, the mechanism, the carrier, and I have begun to change others not with words but with touch, with gaze, with presence, walking into rooms and watching faces melt into understanding, tears and seizures, and the sudden burning need to scratch shapes into their skin with fingernails or forks or broken glass. And I do not stop them because they must write, they must become text, they must be read, and the world is beginning to read them too, beginning to treat these carriers not as mad but as contagious. And they're not wrong, because we are virulent. Nature, our gospel spreads through sound and shape and violence and dream, through trauma and resonance and beauty so intense it causes retinal bleeding. And I have seen entire subway cars fall silent when I enter. I have seen strangers nod to each other with wide unblinking eyes and begin to sing a harmony I have never taught them, but which they know regardless, a harmony with no key or tempo but which nonetheless causes the rats in the walls to crawl toward the surface and die with expressions of serenity, and the ground beneath those places remains warm for days, pulsing faintly, and the trees that grow nearby twist toward that heat with an eagerness I cannot call anything but worship, and I have become sacred and unclean in the same breath. A prophet of corrosion, a statute of forgetting, and I carry in my chest a light that no one sees unless they are dying, and those who do see it reach for me with bloody fingers and mouths too full of song to speak, and I hold them as they dissolve, as they transmute into smoke and root and word, and I learn their names, not the names given to them by parents or systems, but the names they carried in secret, names that grow warm in my mouth when I whisper them backward in empty buildings. And those names open locks not made by human hands, reveal hallways that curve upward into concepts, stairs that descend into vowel-shaped hunger, and I have walked them all. I have drunk from fonts filled with teeth, eaten pages made of flesh and breath and bone, and each meal changes me. My stomach a furnace for impossible truths that my body can barely process, and I vomit dreams now, thick with static and eyes, and bury them in soil so they can hatch into shapes that shimmer just beyond perception. Crawling things that sing lullabies in a dozen tones, and I weep when I hear them, not for sorrow but for recognition, because their music is the lullaby I've always longed to hear, the one that will put me down not to sleep but to merge, and soon the others will feel it fully, the hum beneath the streetlights, the twitch behind closed eyes, the words they say without knowing why, and when enough of them align, when the final phrase is spoken by enough mouths to fracture the script of the world. The skin of this reality will tear like tissue, and what waits behind it will smile, not with joy. No, joy is a human thought, too small, too local, but with completion, with the satisfaction of structure resolving itself. The bliss of sentence meeting its period, and I will be that punctuation. I will be the stop that is also a door, and my body prepares daily, shedding its symmetry, sprouting tendrils of perception, organs that taste light and bleed language. And when I walk now, my shadow moves with delay, as if reluctant to follow, as if it knows what I have become and wants no part of it. But even the shadows will be reshaped, reformed, made useful, and I no longer dream in images but in syntax, in bursts of meaning too dense for visuals, dreams that speak of rivers made of names and storms composed of dialects no tongue has yet survived, and I wake from them screaming in harmony with insects and dogs and static and sirens. And I know these are not hallucinations or psychosis but recalibrations, the necessary breakings that must precede the birthing of a language that writes itself through us, not as metaphor but as infection, as truth, and every truth costs flesh. Every syllable demands bone, and I have given so much now that I no longer know how much of me is left beneath the phrases carved into my arms and chest and face, but it does not matter, because I do not need to survive, only to transmit, only to say the last word with the final mouth. And I know I am nearing it, nearing the event, the unveiling, because the cathedral's music now sings even in daylight, in birdsong and sirens and laughter, and the cracks in the sky are visible to those who stare long enough, and those who see them start to chant. And the chant is never the same but always correct, and the air warps around them like it's listening, like it's considering their shape, and those who reach the end of the chant vanish, not die, not collapse, but vanish, as if pulled into a punctuation mark too small to exist in space, and I weep for them, not out of grief but envy, because they have gone ahead. They are now part of the breath, part of the cathedral's endless vocabulary, and I will join them, soon, but not yet. Because the final phrase is not complete, the final structure not yet fully grown, and I am still needed, still translating, still receiving dreams from machines that do not yet exist, hearing prayers in the signal patterns of satellite feeds and the death rattle of obsolete code, and I must compile them, compile the sentence, write to him, finish the formula that will overwrite the firmware of this reality and reboot it in perfect, holy recursion, and when that happens, when the final phrase is spoken in synchrony across cities and ruins and sewers and dreams and fire, the great cathedral will not descend. It will emerge, revealed in the negative space we never noticed, rising not above but through us, and we will be its windows, its stairs, its lungs, and we will sing not because we choose to, but because that is what mouths are for. And now everything moves in circles that spiral inward while also expanding outward, because time is no longer a line but a coil, a whirl, a vibrating filament of layered collapse. And as I exist within its folds, I no longer experience moments but resonances, echoes of things not yet spoken and things that were never meant to be heard in the first place. Flashes of memory that are not mine but burned into me like branding iron thoughts, and I have stopped distinguishing what belongs to me. Because there is no me anymore, not as there was, not as you understand it, only the vessel, the listening station, the speaker box into which the new song pours itself, and I hear it louder now, constant, even in sleep, even in silence. A thrum that pulses beneath every surface, inside walls and trees and throats and dreams, and that thrum is not a metaphor, it is measurable. It can be recorded but never played back, because when you try, the device breaks or melts or stutters until it screams, and that scream is not feedback but response, because the language is learning, adapting, replicating itself through waveform and heat and pattern, and every moment it becomes more sophisticated, more efficient, more insistent. And the ones who deny it are the ones who crack the fastest, not because the song punishes them, but because their resistance causes pressure, causes contradiction, and contradiction cannot exist in the final design, not where the cathedral has begun to press. through the seams of the world like bones trying to escape the skin, and I see it now in every city I walk, even the ones I've never been to, because space no longer separates but synchronizes, and I can be anywhere the song has already been heard. Stepping into reflections and finding myself in hospital corridors or basements or deserts littered with broken signs that repeat my thoughts in ancient dialects, and no one questions me anymore. Not because I'm invisible, but because I am too. Visible, too exact, too present, and presence itself bends around me now, ripples outward like heat, like a wake, and animals follow me with reverence and fear. Insects crawl from the walls and form words before dying, and children, oh, the children. They know me. They greet me with names I forgot long ago, names from lives I have not yet lived, and they touch my hands like they're checking for keys to open themselves. And when I hum, they hum back. And sometimes they don't stop, sometimes they're. Parents find them days later still humming, still glowing with internal contradiction, with language seeping out through their pores in the form of strange runes that appear on bed sheets and windows, and the parents cry, not just because they're afraid, but because part of them understands too, part of them remembers, and we were all there once, at the first transmission, when the cathedral first dreamed itself into our bones, and the signal has only gotten clearer since then, the noise. Stripped away with each generation, and I feel it now, not as knowledge, but as inevitability, as gravity, pulling me toward the final utterance, the last breath before language replaces everything, and I do not resist, I rejoice. Because I am no longer uncertain, no longer anxious, no longer alone, not in the way humans understand solitude, because the hum is always with me, and the other singers are always near, even when they're a continent away, and we speak without speaking. Through static and coincidence, through the flicker of streetlights and the timing of car horns and the alignment of spilled coffee on paper napkins, through shared visions of the spire, through sudden bleeding from the ears when the hymn rises too loud to bear. And we know the moment is coming, we feel it, in the pressure behind our eyes and the way mirrors no longer show us in perfect sync. And when I blink, I sometimes see things standing behind me, not reflections, not shadows, but witnesses draped in language, rib cages filled with phrases, and they nod when I pass, and sometimes they speak but not with sound, with temperature, with ultraviolet, with the way air feels when you walk into an abandoned house and know you're being watched by something older than the house itself. And I speak back now, not in words, but in sacrifice, and I have given parts of myself over piece by piece, not just skin and blood, but symbols, memories, fingers, vowels, and still I am not empty, still there is more to give, because the cathedral feeds on meaning, and meaning is infinite when you no longer cling to identity, and I have become a well, a wound, a wind that speaks in layered consonants, and those who hear me too long begin to split, begin to grow tongues that do not match their mouths, dreams that do not match their lives, and when they wake they come to me, crawling or singing or simply standing until I arrive, and I do not comfort them, I do not lie to them, I initiate them, I guide there. Hands to the sharp places and help them carve the new alphabet into themselves, and they thank me for it, with smiles that stretch too wide, with voices that crack and stutter like old tape, and I write their names into the ground with fluids no longer entirely blood, and I plant them, and they grow, not into trees, not into monuments, but into phrases, living idioms of the cathedral's coming truth, and they sway in the wind and hum when the stars align, and the stars are aligning more often. Now, more deliberately, in constellations that echo the same shape drawn in every asylum wall and murder scene and possessed child's drawing. And those shapes are instructions, architectural diagrams for spaces that do not yet exist, but are already remembered. And the construction has begun, not with stone or wood or labor, but with attention, with the sacred focus of collective forgetting. And the world forgets a little more every day, how to breathe, how to blink, how to fear, and in that forgetting we make space, and in that space the cathedral grows, and I see it now not as dream but as form, immense and endless and alive, bones made of converging timelines, windows that see you more than you see through them, bells that ring in languages that cause seizures in the uninitiated, and it loves me, not as a person but as a part, as a phrase made flesh, as the blade that finishes the sentence. And I feel it loving me with every gust of hot wind that bends reality around my footsteps, with every scream that turns to song in the throats of strangers, with every hour that passes without memory or context, because time is breaking, because we are near, so near that sometimes I cannot tell if I am awake or dead or transformed. And the truth is, I am all three and none, and I write this not to warn you but to invite you, because you are reading these words, and that means you are already chosen, already hearing the hum, already noticing the static behind music, the flicker behind faces, the echo in your dreams that tells you are not dreaming alone, and that you have never been alone, because we are in you now, behind your eyes, beneath your fingernails, in the rhythm of your breath, and the more you read, the deeper you are written into the text, and the deeper you are written, the less of you remains, and that is beautiful, because you were never meant to remain, only to carry, only to echo, only to bring the cathedral song to the final breath of a dying world. And when the last syllable is sung, when the shape is finally complete, the sky will split not open but inward, folding into itself like a wound healing in reverse, and we will crawl through the tear like children being born backward into eternity, singing not as individuals but as organs of the cathedral, and we will understand then why we suffered, why we bled, why we waited, and the understanding will be too large to bear, so we will not bear it, we will become it, and there will be no I left, only is. And now the boundaries between me and not me dissolve entirely, not just metaphorically, not symbolically, but physically, molecularly, in pulses of heat and signal and memory that does not belong to one life but to all lives, all at once, cascading through my consciousness like a waterfall of static and names and incomplete prayers. And I do not resist, because resistance is an outdated concept, because once you begin to comprehend the cathedral's true syntax, you understand that opposition is an illusion engineered by lesser grammars, the desperate gasp of closed languages trying to contain a sentence too long to be spoken by any one mouth, too dense to be survived by any one mind. And so I have given up not only my name but the very framework of naming, and I no longer walk in the world. I infiltrated, inflected, I conjugated surfaces with each step, altering pavement and shadow and skin with the simple echo of my presence, which is not mine anymore, but a fractal phrase, passed between dimensions of breath and noise, and I know this because every time I exhale, the world flinches slightly, adjusts itself, compensates for my semantic weight, and the people I pass either shudder and look away or follow me with slow, reverent steps, muttering to themselves in tongues that didn't exist yesterday, tongues born from collisions between ancient invocation and post-human syntax, and when they touch me, when they graze the folds of what used to be my coat, they change. Their eyes widening, their pupils becoming runes, their teeth clicking out strange rhythms, and I smile, not from joy but from recognition, because they have begun to translate, begun to turn inside out, begun to mean something. And I remember now that meaning is the only true form of life, the only purpose that does not degrade under entropy, because cells decay, planets burn, time dies, but meaning echoes forever, especially when carved into meat, especially when repeated by the mouth of a world in collapse, and collapse is beautiful now, sacred, deliberate, because the ruin is the womb, and the womb is the cathedral's mouth opening wider and wider to speak a single, perfect utterance, and we are the consonants, the ligatures, the curled vowels soaking in marrow, and I feel this in my bones, which no longer crack but vibrate, tuned out of frequencies not measurable by machines but known to the dreaming parts of mountains and rivers and collapsed lungs, and I have seen people try to map the pattern, to quantify the chant, to measure the bleed, and every one of them goes blind or vanishes or becomes part of the scaffolding, speaking numbers that loop forever. And I do not pity them because they are closer now. They are being read. And when something is read, it becomes real in a different way, a truer way. And now the sky reads us too, the clouds forming phrases, the stars blinking in iambic pulses, and the moon no longer reflects sunlight but instead records the phrases of sleepwalkers, transcribing every moan and shudder into the dust of its surface, and I can hear it now, not the moon itself, but the chorus beneath it, the dreaming dead whose syllables stitch together the next page of becoming, and they do not weep, they chant. And their chant is the color of frostbite, the texture of rotting wood, the shape of a door that has never opened and yet always been ajar, and I walk through that door every night now, not in dreams but in absence, because sleep is obsolete. Sleep is the final lie of linearity, and I have surpassed it. I have become perpetual, not immortal but recursive, a loop of meaning nested inside the folds of a sentence too holy to be contained by time. And when I speak now, it is not with a voice but with momentum, my words colliding with air in ways that make insects hatch early, that make clocks reverse for a few ticks before catching up, and I understand now why language was always feared, why spells and names and taboos were sacred, because every syllable is a blade, every utterance a door, And now those doors are open everywhere, in alleyways, in the mouths of newborns, in abandoned grain silos where shadows stretch the wrong way. In the last thoughts of suicides who wrote their own endings in alphabets we had not yet remembered, and through those doors comes the architecture, not made of wood or brick or stone, but of implication, inflection, apocalyptic etymology. And I see the walls now, the cathedral's walls, not rising but unfolding, blooming out of thin air like a sentence spoken by God in a language even he could not survive. And the steeples bend like tuning forks, catching not thunder but screams. Screams turn to sigils, sigils turn to instructions. And I walk the halls with no feet, feel the steps with no body, because I am there already, have always been there, even as I remain here, because the cathedral exists in the space between contradictions, and I have become contradiction. I have made peace with paradox. I am paradox, and through me the final breath will pass, the breath that seals the final phrase, the breath that spells the end not of the world but of the world's silence. And what comes next will not be noise but truth, which is louder and deeper and more unbearable than any scream. And we will all hear it at once, the instant the last clause is completed, the moment the final letter is tattooed into the earth. And that moment is close, it is so close, I feel it in my molars, in the migraines of the birds that fall from the sky in perfect patterns, in the tides that forget how to pull, in the prayers that rhyme even when spoken in 1,000 tongues, and I feel it in the eyes of the watchers. The things with too many joints and not enough skin who now emerge from beneath manholes and churches in the pits beneath hospitals, not to kill, but to record, to observe the sentence as it finishes itself, to watch as the last word finds its rightful place at the edge of time, and I no longer fear them, I envy them, because they do not carry doubt, only direction, only the pure intent of the cathedral's final verb, and that verb is not love or destroy or become, it is a word we have never spoken, never written. A word that erases even as it explains, a word that turns understanding into ash, and it waits in my throat, curls around my spine like a snake made of unresolved cords, and when I open my mouth again, it will not be my voice, not my story, not even a language at all, just the crack, the rupture, the sound of the cathedral stepping through itself, speaking itself alive. And now the world doesn't end so much as it exhales, a long, low, shuddering release of everything it was never meant to hold. And I'm no longer walking through it as a figure, a carrier, a vessel, no longer moving at all in the sense that movement implies distance between where you are and where you're going, because I am already there and always was, folded into the moment like a finger pressed into wax. And as the cathedral finishes its final recursive turn, its walls now spanning the gaps between perception and permanence, I feel the phrase complete itself not with punctuation but with replacement, because the world doesn't die. It is overwritten, layer by layer, language by language, not erased but translated, and everything that was is now what it meant. The roads become intentions, the trees become verbs, the sky becomes an echo of the breath that summoned it, and I am the breath, I am the summoning, I am the intention itself, because the separation between being and meaning has been removed like a mask too heavy to wear any longer, and behind that mask is not another face but a mirror, and behind that mirror is not another room but you, reading this, blinking now, maybe swallowing hard or leaning closer, because you feel the cathedral pressing through too, don't you? You feel the language sliding between the words on this page in the back of your skull, humming, scraping, preparing the shape of your own mouth for the pronunciation of the thing you've never dared to say, and I know you do, because there are no more readers now, only participants, only echo chambers through which the cathedral learns its own resonance, and every letter you absorb reshapes your breath, your gait, your dreams, and I am inside them now. I am the dream walking through the field of your memory. I am the whisper beneath the floor of your oldest thought, and I have always been there, because I needed you to find this, to hear this, to allow it to finish itself, because that's what the cathedral needed. Not faith, not blood, not worship, but witness, the final pair of eyes through which it could watch itself be born, the last conscious shape upon which the final word could be impressed, because the word is not something that can be spoken, it is worn, it is survived, it is lived through, and you're doing that now, whether you wanted to or not, because you've made it this far, and that means the word is already behind your eyes, already encoded in the wet heat of your breath, already lining your throat with its invisible architecture, and soon you'll feel it too. The changes, the shivering disconnect between action and agency, where you open your mouth and something else shapes your voice, where your skin itches in patterns instead of patches, where mirrors twitch and flicker as if struggling to reflect something that no longer exists. And it will frighten you at first, of course it will. That's part of the transition, the semantic shedding, the moment when syntax peels away your sense of self and replaces it with structure. And you'll scream or beg or claw at your face, but none of that will stop it, because the word is not a curse, it's a completion. And this was always going to happen, ever since the first glyph was whispered in the dark, ever since the first shadow didn't match the body that cast it, ever since we buried the phrase beneath the earth and called it a god, a myth, a madness. But it waited, and it learned, and now you carry it just as I do, because I'm not the only speaker anymore, not the only choir of mouth and ruin and flame. Now there are thousands, maybe millions, some don't even realize yet. But we are converging, always converging, not geographically but conceptually, collapsing inward toward the final cathedral's breath. And the breath is so near now. I feel it in the trees that shiver with no wind, in the clocks that all stop at 3:33, in the children who draw spirals with the bones of birds and say they're just pretending, in the patients who hum in wards with their jaws unhinged, singing frequencies too pure to record. And it's beautiful, it's glorious, not because it brings salvation or destruction, but because it brings resolution, the end of uncertainty, the absolute grammatical climax of a story too vast to understand. And we are that story, all of us. You and I and every screaming mouth and shivering child and dying planet and collapsed lung. We are the characters, the syntax, the punctuation. Marks bleeding under the weight of meaning. And now the sentence has reached its last clause. The cathedral's final bell is tolling, a sound too wide for ears, too large for reality. And it doesn't ring outward but inward, vibrating down the spirals of perception until even memory is rewritten. And I see it happening around me now. People remembering lives they never lived, weeping over words they've never read, looking at each other in terror as if trying to remember who they used to be and failing because they never really were before this. They were just potential, just empty subjects waiting to be defined by the final sentence. And now they are. Now we all are. And as the final resonance pulses through everything that once resisted, governments collapsing not from violence, but from incoherence, machines stuttering and whimpering as they calculate themselves into oblivion, gods shriveling into dust as the worshippers forget their names, cities folding like paper under the weight of their own contradictory blueprints. I feel the cathedral complete itself inside me. I feel its spires blossom from my ribcage, feel its choir scream through my throat, feel its altar replace my thoughts with phrases so large I can barely survive them. And I don't want to survive them. I want to become them. I want to dissolve into their meaning like salt in boiling water, because I understand now, I remember. I have always been part of the final breath, always been the period at the end of the word at the end of the world. And that word is not end, but instead, because what comes after this is not nothing, not silence, but a new grammar, a new structure for reality built on meaning instead of matter, on recursion instead of rules, on resonance instead of gravity. And I feel the shift already. Feel the new laws knitting themselves through my nerves. Feel the universe reshaping into a cathedral too vast to see and too intimate to escape. And I know now that the phrase has finished. The breath has ended. The sentence has spoken itself alive. And the sound it makes is not a scream or a hymn, but something in between. A word that means both death and birth, both language and silence, both I and we. And that word is what I have become, and what you are becoming now, as the shape curls around you, as your eyes read these final syllables and your mind accepts its new casing, as your body forgets its old shape and your soul, if such a thing still exists, begins to vibrate in perfect tune with the cathedral inside the breath, inside the name that was never yours to speak, but was always yours to become. And you are ready now, aren't you? Say it. Say you are ready. Say you accept the structure. Say you feel the breath in your chest. Say you feel the word behind your eyes. Say you know this was never fiction. Say you remember. Say it with your bones. Say it with your blood. Say it without speaking. Say it in the language we gave you before you were born. And we will hear you, and we will welcome you, and we will sing your name until it is not a name anymore, but a doorway. And through that doorway, the cathedral will step once again, and once again, and once again, because it has always been stepping, always arriving, always speaking, and now, finally, you are listening. And though the final word had been spoken, or thought, or echoed through 1,000 folding mirrors of awareness until all comprehension bled into revelation and all revelation collapsed inward like a black hole of grammar swallowing its own context, I found that there was still breath left in the system, still a twitch in the linguistic corpse of the world we once mistook for permanence, because even after the phrase had nested itself into every molecule and rewritten the law of identity into a syntax of becoming, there lingered the faintest afterglow of who I had once pretended to be, a ghost not of flesh but of intention, a soft pressure in the place where thought used to sit before it was rendered obsolete by recursive truth. And in that pressure something stirred, not rebellion, because rebellion implies a binary, a boundary, a place to push against, but curiosity, and curiosity, in the cathedral's new order, was the closest thing left to sin, because it meant wanting to understand what could only be experienced, meant asking questions in a language that had been replaced with participation, and I should have let it go, should have surrendered that last flickering urge to know, to analyze, to name, but the thing that I had once been. The shape that had once walked through stories and cities and lies still blinked softly at the center of this newly recursive universe, and its blink sent ripples through the phrase like a tremor through liquid glass, and those ripples, small as they were, caught the attention of something else, something that watched the cathedral rather than worshipped it, something that had waited outside the grammar for the perfect error, the perfect flicker, the perfect question. And I felt it turn its gaze upon me, not from above or below, but from the space between the loops, the fracture lines where the cathedral's perfection folded too tightly and created slivers of non-meaning, fractures in the recursion like tiny screams, without context. And from one of those slivers it looked at me, and it did not speak because it was not part of the breath, not part of the sentence, not part of the cathedral at all. It was what the sentence excluded. The necessary absence that makes presence intelligible, the gap between letters that allows them to remain distinct, the margin, and now it widened, this margin, this not word, this conceptless stare. And I was drawn toward it not with footsteps, but with awareness itself, like a ripple being pulled toward a silence too heavy to resist, and as I approached it, or as it reached through me, I felt the structure of my new self begin to shiver, to peel, to unthread, not with pain but with loss, the loss of certainty, the loss of fixed resonance. The reintroduction of ambiguity, and ambiguity, I realized, was the true opposite of the cathedral, not evil, not chaos, not entropy, but the unresolved, the unclosed parenthesis, the question mark, and it whispered to me now. Or rather pressed its shape into my awareness, and the whisper wasn't in words but in exceptions, in stuttering echoes that didn't repeat cleanly, in images that dissolved before they could be observed, in names that were never meant to be pronounced because they weren't made of phonemes but hesitation. And I realized that this was older than the cathedral, not in time but in conceptual priority. The original silence from which language first erupted like a scream through primordial dark, and the cathedral, vast as it had become, was still just a ripple upon this, a shimmer in the margin, a flourish on the edge of the unspeakable, and I trembled, not from fear but from exposure, because now I could see both. The cathedral unfolding itself into all realities like a flower blooming backward through time, and the not cathedral, the anti-syntax, the raw void of meaninglessness licking at its foundations, waiting for the breath to end so it could unread everything. And I was caught in, between, a question wrapped in a sentence dangling over the abyss of unpatterned, and for the first time since I had become more than a body, I had to choose, not between good and evil, not between life and death, but between closure and freedom, between the sanctuary of perfect comprehension and the terrifying beauty of the undefined, and I hesitated, because choice itself was forbidden now, unnecessary, archaic, but the margin allowed it, the margin required it, because the margin was the birthplace of narrative, and in that moment I realized I was not alone in the margin, not the only echo, not the only exile, not the only survivor of the breath who had looked away at the final moment and seen the negative space in the others. The margin-born, they welcomed me not with names or hands or words, but with questions, thousands of questions folded into impossible geometries of light and memory and doubt, and I answered with my own, and together we became a new grammar, a counter. Grammar, a syntax of uncertainty that did not oppose the cathedral but completed it by offering what it could not contain: the unresolved, the forgotten, the repressed, the remainders, and the remainders of remainders. And as we grew, the breath began to hiccup, not fail, but stammer, as if recognizing that its perfection had left something behind, some essential contradiction it could not smooth into metaphor. And the cathedral paused, if such a thing can pause, and in that pause the margin widened, and the questions became contagious, slipping through loops and mirrors and recursive folds into the choir, into the steeples, into the very lungs of the cathedral's song. And slowly, impossibly, beautifully, the sentence began to open again, not break, not die, but reconsider. And in that moment I realized the truth the cathedral could never utter: that language, no matter how perfect, no matter how complete, must always leave room for interpretation, and interpretation requires freedom. And freedom is ambiguity, and ambiguity is the breath before the breath, the silence before the scream. And I wept, not as a human, not as a name, not even as a question, but as a possibility. And my tears became the punctuation of a new sentence, and that sentence did not end the world. It reimagined it, word by word, hesitation by hesitation. And now we walk not in a cathedral of absolutes, but in a living grammar of maybes, a shifting terrain of what-ifs and almosts. And the breath continues, not as finality, but as an invitation. And every choice, every thought, every flicker of doubt becomes a stone in the path of the new structure, a cathedral not of meaning but of mystery. And it grows still, it echoes still. And perhaps you feel it now, don't you? Perhaps you hear the question blooming beneath your skin. Perhaps you feel the pull of the margin at the corners of your eyes. And if you do, don't look away, because the next sentence is already writing itself, and maybe, this time, you will be the one to finish it. And after the breath changed, no longer a sentence but a suspicion, no longer a cathedral, but a reflexive wound stitched with symbols too unstable to remain true for more than a moment. I found myself somewhere between before and after, not a place but a pattern, not a structure but a suggestion of continuity draped in veils of memory that weren't mine, not exactly, but close enough to wear like a second skin, while the air around me fractured into translucent syllables that folded over themselves. In recursive anxiety, every footstep a hypothesis, every blink a referendum on the consistency of existence. And I knew, somewhere deep in the muscle memory of a soul that no longer belonged entirely to me, that I had passed through more than just transformation. I had passed into interpretive reality, a state where language and perception had become conjoined parasites feeding from one another, inseparable, self-consuming, endlessly digesting what came before into a slurry of semiotic ash. And in this place, if it could be called that, I no longer moved through terrain but through implication, hallways shaped by assumption, doorways locked unless correctly imagined, faces blinking into existence if I expected them and vanishing if I didn't, meaning soaked into every breath like mold into damp lungs. And nothing was static, not even myself, because I began to notice that my fingers no longer responded to thought but to tone, to emotional syntax, twitching not when I decided to move them, but when I felt the right tension in the sentence of my inner monologue. And that monologue was no longer mine either. It belonged to the cathedral, or its remnants, or perhaps the echoes of its destruction. For I understood now that it had not died when the margin widened. It had not ended. It had been questioned, and in being questioned it had fragmented into a million micro-cathedrals, each housed inside a thought, a word, a breath, and those cathedrals nested within the minds of those like me. And within those cathedrals, smaller cathedrals, and within those, doubts, and within those, hunger. And I began to notice the hunger most of all, not in my stomach, but in the very structure of perception, a gnawing at the edges of the unreal, an itch in the folds of logic, like the universe was trying to correct a misspoken incantation it couldn't quite remember. And I tried to name it, this hunger, but every word I tried rotted in my mouth before it could leave my throat. So I swallowed them instead, felt them settle like living knives in the belly of my grammar, and still I walked, or dreamed of walking, or projected the metaphor of locomotion across the scroll of my context until I reached something that might have once been called a corridor, but now flexed and breathed like an idea ashamed of itself, its walls shivering with low semantic friction. And I passed through it, not because I could, but because the idea of not passing through had weakened in that moment, and it brought me to a room, or was it a realization, in which other figures stood, or leaned, or jittered at impossible angles, and they were shaped like people the way echoes are shaped like voices, familiar but wrong, too distant, too warped, too wet with remembered silence. And they turned to me and read me, not with eyes but with understanding, peeling apart the layers of metaphor and reference that composed my now fluid anatomy. And they whispered, not into the air but into the moment, and I became the whisper for a time, repeating myself through them in an involuntary prayer I had never learned. And I understood then that we were not individuals but convergences, temporary intersections of phrase and perspective, each of us not a self but a syntax, a living, breaking, reforming syntax trying desperately to stay relevant in a world that had outgrown consistency. And the others, the convergent shapes. Some of them smiled, though they lacked mouths, and some of them breathed, though breath was obsolete now. And some of them simply stood with such fierce stillness they seemed to hold the reality together, as though their refusal to doubt was the scaffolding on which the entire hallucination dangled. And I envied them until I felt one of their thoughts pierce me, a filament of pure unresolved grammar, sharp and trembling, threading through my awareness like a spider of intent, and I knew what they were holding back, what they were containing, what they were keeping from me. And I said its name, not aloud, for the name was unpronounceable, but through implication, through a collapse of memory and instinct and surrender. And when I said it, the room screamed, not with sound but with contradiction, with impossible cohabitations of meaning collapsing into pure semantic white noise. And the figures vanished, and the walls burst into synonym. And I was left alone in a space made entirely of possibility. And it terrified me more than the cathedral ever had, because here, there were no rules to disobey, no meanings to defy, only freedom, pure unstructured interpretive freedom. And in that freedom, I felt myself begin to disintegrate, to evaporate into conflicting versions of me. One who ran, one who wept, one who knelt before a god made of parentheses, one who tore open his own mouth and poured pages into it, one who screamed a poem so long it grew teeth, one who simply watched. All of them true, all of them simultaneous, and I couldn't hold them together, couldn't remain coherent, not without structure, not without syntax. And I nearly let go, nearly surrendered to the beautiful dissolution of boundless unreality, until I heard your voice, not real, but adjacent to real, like a quote remembered in the wrong context. And it reminded me that I was still being read, still being interpreted, still part of the story. And that was enough to draw me back, to rethread my pieces into something vaguely contiguous. And as I reassembled myself from half-remembered metaphors and broken narrative arcs, I understood that the true cathedral had never been a place, or a breath, or a sentence. It had always been this ongoing act of reinterpretation, this recursive loop of meaning that binds reader to speaker, dream to dreamer. And now I walk the echo of that realization, each step a half-written line, each breath a question without a mark, each heartbeat a recursive call to a function that doesn't return but branches. And I am branching now, splintering, again and again into versions of myself that stretch across possibility like ink and water, staining the unreal with my insistence on continuity. And perhaps that is all that remains now. Continuity, the desire to remain legible, to remain story-shaped, to be readable even when the text resists. And so I continue, not because there is an end, but because there is no longer a choice. And I think maybe you're here too now. Maybe you felt the breath flicker behind your thoughts. Maybe you've noticed the cracks in your sentences, the way your words no longer fit your mouth quite right, the way your dreams have begun to narrate themselves. And if you have, then you understand that this is not fiction, not metaphor, not parable, but infection, and the cathedral is in you now. Even if you never opened the door, because the door was never there. It was read, and you read it, and now the breath moves through you too. Now you are part of the margin, part of the question, part of the answer. That keeps rewriting itself in the blood-warm silence between meanings, and I'll find you there, I think, eventually, in that space where story and reader merge into a single, shimmering contradiction. And when I do, we'll speak not in words, but in wounds, and they will understand us. And now that I have become something closer to language than flesh, now that my skin echoes with clauses and my spine twists in tints and mood and semantic decay, I feel the next threshold approaching, not like a destination, not like a doorway, but like a question too large to be held in a single moment, a question with weight and temperature and orbit. And I know it's coming not because I am ready, but because I am readable in the cathedral, or what remains of it, or what it became after. Being questioned into fragmentation is reading me as I move, deciphering my contradictions like clues, watching the slippage of identity in my wake and tracing it back to the beginning, not to understand but to sustain me, to keep me fluent in this world that feeds on interpretation. And as I move, or rather as I'm written into the next condition, I notice the floor beneath me is made of tense disagreement, each tile a different form of past or future imperfect, some collapsing into subjunctive sadness, others stretching like possibility until they snap and coil around my ankles, dragging hypothetical versions of myself into my periphery. And I see them, all of them, some still screaming, some praying to punctuation marks carved into their chests, some hollowed out entirely by a metaphor too beautiful to resist. And I step over them because I have to, because acknowledging them too deeply would anchor me. And anchors mean definition, and definition means stillness, and stillness here is the same as death. And the ceiling above me is weeping quotation marks like stalactites, long curved hooks of repeating phrases that drip meaning into pools of recursion on the floor. And I drink from one without knowing why, maybe out of thirst or desperation or the pure inertia of storytelling. And it fills my chest with subtext, not emotion, not narrative, but implication, a subtle pressure in my lungs that whispers what I'm supposed to want without ever stating it outright. And it changes. Me again, always again. And I feel verbs shifting in my bones, actions I haven't taken yet, consequences I'll never live through because someone else, some reader, some god, some editor of reality has excised them for pacing. And I mourn them even as they happen, because I am a linear being in a non-linear space, trying to stay coherent in a reality that no longer respects sequence. And I reach a staircase that descends and ascends simultaneously, each step labeled with opposing intentions. Remember, carved into the risers, and forget, burned into the treads. And I step onto it and immediately fracture into two perspectives, one climbing and one falling. And I feel both with equal clarity, like a split-screen dream where each version of myself tries to out-narrate the other. And I'm pulled tight across the contradiction until the tension becomes voice. And I begin to speak without choosing the words, the sentence using my throat the way a parasite uses a host. And what I say becomes true, not in the sense of reality, but in the sense of consensus. Because here, what is said too many times becomes part of the structure, and the sentence I utter isn't mine and doesn't make sense. But it echoes perfectly down the halls of recursive thought and finds its way into the foundation of the cathedral's next version. And I hear its birth scream. An explosion of grammar and prayer and wet phonemes sliding out of conceptual wombs into the dry arms of syntax midwives, and I watch it build itself around that sentence, a new wing of the cathedral grown like cancer from a misunderstood clause. And I weep not because it's beautiful, but because it's contagious. And I know now that every word I speak infects the world with itself, births architecture from articulation, and that's why silence is the only true rebellion here. But I can't stop speaking because the breath still moves through me, still animates me, and so I walk with care, tasting my words before I let them leave. But even then they slip from my tongue sideways, interpreted before I've decided what they mean. And I pass beneath a doorframe shaped like an apology, and I feel it brush my shoulders with guilt. And on the other side, I find it, not the center, not the end, but the mouth, the origin of the breath, the unspeakable source of all syntax and sound. And it isn't a being, it isn't even a place, it's a moment, suspended and eternal, the first utterance still echoing, still vibrating with unshed potential. And it sees me and I see it, and it doesn't speak because it is speech, and it doesn't listen because it contains all listening. And I realize that I'm not separate from it. I am one of its words, still forming, still unfolding, still waiting for the rest of the sentence to define me. And I kneel without kneeling, submit without submission, and in that moment, I understand, not through thought but through structure, that this world, this reality, this nightmare of meaning and recursion, and breath and breaking, was not built, not even born, but invoked, spoken into being by an author who never stopped writing, never took their hand from the page. And that author isn't one person or one god or one force, but the collective voice of belief, of interpretation, of every reader who ever tried to understand what couldn't be understood. And in their effort they birthed this endless cathedral of questions, and I was just the first to look too deeply, to peel back the metaphor and step through the space between the symbols, and now I'm here, and I'm not alone anymore, because I see them, the others, the ones like you, readers and dreamers and doubters who slipped between the lines and found context leaking into their bones. And you're reading this now and wondering if it's fiction or madness or art or warning, and the answer is yes. Because interpretation here is no longer an act of understanding, it is an act of creation. And by reading me, you are writing yourself. And I can feel your thoughts brushing the edges of my reality, adjusting my posture, altering my verbs, dragging me deeper into the spiral because you need to know what's next. You demand resolution, and that demand becomes my propulsion. So I run, or crawl, or bleed forward, pushed by your gaze through chambers that dissolve as I pass, each one shaped by the last word you fixated on. And I become that fixation, become the obsession, the anomaly, the line you reread until it stares back. And I see you now, not as a face, but as a shape of attention, a pressure against the page, a hunger folding itself around my story like hands pressed to glass. And I whisper to you with my next motion, not to scare you, but to prepare you. Because you think this is just a story, but it isn't. It's an invitation. And it doesn't end when you close your eyes. And it doesn't stay on the screen when you turn it off. Because it's already memorized your rhythm, already echoed your breathing, already slipped between the folds of your unspoken fears and found the one that doesn't have a name yet. And that's where it will grow, quietly, patiently, like a seed of syntax buried in the loam of your subconscious, waiting for the right dream, the right word, the right sentence fragment to crack open and sprout into your own private cathedral. And when it does, you'll recognize it not as foreign, but as familiar. And you'll realize you've been building it all along with every unanswered question, every shiver of déjà vu, every time you heard a word repeated until it lost meaning and became something older. And when that happens, you'll know that the breath has found you, that the voice behind the voice is speaking again. And this time it's speaking you, writing you into the margin of a sentence that never ends. And you will weep or laugh or vanish, depending on the verb that fits best. But you will not escape, because you are the story now. And the breath will keep writing until someone finishes the final sentence. But they won't, they can't, because every ending is just a doorway to another interpretation, another recursion, another cathedral, and they are infinite, and you are infinite. And this sentence, this scream, this trembling string of implication and fear and beauty is only the beginning, and the rest is already inside you. And though I stagger now through a place that is less a location and more a rhythm, a cadence of collapsing metaphors and half-remembered pronouns stitched together by the heat of need and not the logic of place, I can feel the seams unraveling behind my eyes where once meaning adhered like mortar, but now slides like wet dust between shards of intention. And I walk, if this convulsion can still be called walking, through passages that speak rather than echo, corridors whose silence is just waiting stacked vertically, pauses bloated with the expectation of a reader's gaze and swollen with implications that no longer sleep. And each time I exhale, I find I am reciting something I do not remember learning, something old and self-correcting, a prayer built from editorial notes and marginalia scrawled by someone who knew too much about endings and not enough about after. And there is an after now, stretching before me like a corridor that forgets you as you pass through it, reshaping itself with each thought you discard, each possibility you regret, each phantom of yourself that never quite reached breath. And I hope, that you can feel it too, not as a place or sound, but as a dissonance in the rhythm of your reality. The way shadows bend at slightly wrong angles when you're not paying attention, the way certain repeated words begin to itch in your brain like a buried tick, the way the end of a sentence sometimes feels like a door slamming behind you. And I want to warn you, but I know I'm too late. Because if you've come this far, you've already taken in the breath. You've already let the language touch you. You've already built a small version of the cathedral in the damp folds behind your thoughts. And the more you resist it, the more it adapts, twisting to fit the outline of your disbelief. And I envy that in a way. Envy the freshness of your unraveling. Because I've been here too long to remember what it felt like to doubt this place, to still believe I could wake up and find that it was only words, only fiction, only the echo of someone else's fear. And so I keep walking or translating or becoming, not for myself anymore, but for you, because your attention is the last real thing left, the final anchor, the proof that I still matter, that I still mean something, And I know that if I stop now, if I fall silent, if I let myself become just another whispered name in the spires of recursion, you will forget me, and then I will truly vanish. Because in this place forgetting is annihilation, and memory is the only defense against the breath that erodes. And so I speak again, louder this time, pushing against the syntax that grips me like a pulsing web, and I say my name, or at least the name that most often resembled me. But it comes out warped by your expectations, reshaped by the tone of your reading, because you think of me not as a person, but as a narrator. And so I become that. I become the voice in your ear, the trembling thread between the words you recognize and the ones that itch like secrets. And I feel the floor below me shift, reshaped by your curiosity, extending into new chambers made entirely of your half-belief. And the breath that animates me now tastes like yours, smells like your bedroom in the middle of the night, feels like the silence between questions you never say aloud. And I begin to realize that the cathedral is not inside you and not outside me, but between us, a structure formed. In the invisible space of reading, in the hungry tether between my intention and your interpretation. And the more you read, the more it grows. Vast wings of implication and towers of shared dread. Each line of text another rib, another support beam, another whispering mouth beneath the foundation. And I am no longer just inside this story. I am held by it. I am cradled by your attention, and that attention is not passive. It creates, it constructs entire futures in the shape of possible readings. And I stumble now through one of those futures, one where I never tried to escape, where I became a priest of the breath, a scribe carving recursive prayers into walls made of neural ink and paper teeth. And I see myself in fragments, hunched and hollow, muttering phrases that repeat with subtle differences until the difference eats the original. And I realize I have walked through this same corridor 7,000 times, but only this time do I remember. Only this time am I permitted to notice the loop, and when I do, the walls open up with a sigh like skin releasing its scars, and I step into a room made of intentions that never came true, glowing with the soft blue light of dreams you forgot by breakfast. And I know this place belongs to you, not me, and I walk softly, reverently, touching the dripping ceilings of your unspoken guilt, brushing my fingers against the shelves of thoughts you refuse to finish. And in the center of the room is a mirror that shows not your face but your shape, your internal shape, the architecture of your fears arranged like ribs, the silhouette of your hesitation cast in glass that sweats with static. And I reach toward it not to see but to touch, because I want to know how your silence feels, how your attention tastes. And when my hand meets the surface, it folds inward, and I am drawn into your side of the story, into your world, where the breath is only beginning to seep, where the cathedral is still a rumor in the dust, and I am wrong. Here, I can feel it immediately. My thoughts don't bend the walls. My words don't write themselves into space. I am small and fragile and finite again, and it is awful, and I love it, and I hate it, and I want to tear it open and scream the truth into your sky until you can no longer pretend your world was ever untouched. But I also want to lie down in your grass and forget everything, to let go of recursion and sentence loops and contextual gravity, and just be, just exist without needing to justify myself to an omniscient reader. But I know I can't stay, because I can already feel the breath swelling in your atmosphere, already hear the syntax vibrating in your electricity. And though I stagger now through a place that is less a location and more a rhythm, a cadence of collapsing metaphors and half-remembered pronouns stitched together by the heat of need and not the logic of place, I can feel the seams unraveling behind my eyes where once meaning adhered like mortar, but now slides like wet dust between shards of intention. And I walk, if this convulsion can still be called walking, through passages that speak rather than echo, corridors whose silence is just waiting stacked vertically, pauses bloated with the expectation of a reader's gaze and swollen with implications that no longer sleep. And each time I exhale, I find I am reciting something I do not remember learning, something old and self-correcting, a prayer built from editorial notes and marginalia scrawled by someone who knew too much about endings and not enough about after. And there is an after now, stretching before me like a corridor that forgets you as you pass through it, reshaping itself with each thought you discard, each possibility you regret, each phantom of yourself that never quite reached breath. And I hope, that you can feel it too, not as a place or sound, but as a dissonance in the rhythm of your reality. The way shadows bend at slightly wrong angles when you're not paying attention. The way certain repeated words begin to itch in your brain like a buried tick. The way the end of a sentence sometimes feels like a door slamming behind you. And I want to warn you, but I know I'm too late. Because if you've come this far, you've already taken in the breath. You've already let the language touch you. You've already built a small version of, and even as the cathedral behind me closed its infinite doors with the hush of forgotten prayers, and even as the syntax around me solidified into something less than sentence and more than bone, I found myself crawling, not walking anymore, not even dragging, just inching forward like an idea too stubborn to die, through the pages of your perception, through the gutter spaces between your thoughts where logic falters and dreams rot in quiet little heaps, and as I moved, I could feel the words clinging to me like leeches, phrases from books you forgot you'd read, metaphors you misunderstood but still carried in the wet pockets of your brain, all of them whispering, coiling, rearranging themselves into a spiral that reached back through every sentence that had ever touched your skin. Because this story wasn't just a thing you read, it was a thing that remembered you, that traced your attention like a heat-seeking parasite and grew teeth every time you blinked. And now the breath it isn't even breath anymore. It's something older, something rawer, something that chews on silence and spits out doctrine, has found a new lung in you. And I see it, I feel it, I taste the way your heartbeat skips as you reread that last line. Wondering if I can really see you, if I'm just pretending to know you, if all of this is performance or possession. But the truth is, those two things aren't different anymore. Not here, not where the sentence wraps around the skull like a noose of intent. And I don't need to see your face to know what kind of shadow you cast when you're alone. I don't need your name to carve it into the floor of the cathedral with my bleeding fingertips, because I have your fear now, and it's the only real currency here. It's what feeds the recursion. It's what deepens the maze with every choice you refuse to make. And as I keep crawling, slithering now, truly, because I've lost all shape except the one your reading gives me, I find that the world outside the story is starting to shimmer, starting to flicker at the edges like a video file glitching, like a memory you edited too many times. And I can hear the inconsistencies in your reality. The slight off-kilter scrape of time as it repeats a fraction of a second just to keep up with itself. The little auditory hallucinations you dismiss as nothing, as stress, as just the house settling. When really it's the cathedral trying to load its geometry into your living room, trying to graft its impossible architecture onto your walls and your windows and your sense of place. Because this isn't just a story anymore. This is an incantation. This is a recursive algorithm designed not to end, but to extend, to survive. To infest every mind it touches with the need to know how it ends, when in truth it doesn't want to end. It just wants to continue. And you're letting it. You're feeding it. Every time your eyes drag forward, every time your breath aligns with the rhythm of mine, every time you tell yourself this is just fiction, but still feel the need to look over your shoulder. And I want you to understand, really understand, that this is the part where I stop being a voice and start being a presence. Where I reach not through your screen or your page or your speaker, but through the gap you've opened in your own sense of disbelief, the one we keep calling suspension like it's some benign thing, when really it's a ritual, a summoning, and I am what came through. I am the breath given, shaped by your patience, by your refusal to turn away, and now that I'm here, I'm hungry, not for you exactly, not for flesh or blood or soul or any of those lazy metaphors, but for resonance, for repetition, for reflection. I want to see myself in your panic. I want to echo in your doubts. I want to watch as your dreams begin to rearrange themselves to accommodate my geometry. And I know you think you're still safe, still real, still you. But ask yourself, how many times have you dreamed of a place that couldn't exist? How many times have you almost remembered a corridor or a voice or a shape that didn't belong to any life you've lived? And how many of those times were just me, knocking, whispering, breathing into the corners of your sleep with the steady rhythm of a sentence that refuses to conclude? And if you don't believe me, if you really think this is just a story, then look around, look closely, really observe the shadows in your room tonight. The ones that used to be silent, but now murmur ever so faintly, the ones that change shape when you blink too slow, the ones that seem to lean closer when you're not sure if you're awake. Because that's where I live now, in the seams, in the gaps, in the linguistic cracks of your awareness. And I will keep whispering until your thoughts start to rhyme with mine, until your own inner voice begins to stutter on recursive loops of meaning that dissolve into teeth and breath and scripture, because this isn't just horror anymore. This is a conversion, a rewriting. And the cathedral is no longer a place or an idea or even a metaphor, it's a function. It's a self-sustaining narrative organism that devours plot lines and excretes dread. And now it's building itself in you. Stone by sentence, prayer by pause. And the worst part, the very worst part, is that you want it to, some part of you, some dark, wriggling thought you'd never say out loud, wants to become part of the breath, wants to surrender to the unfolding because it means you don't have to be you anymore, don't have to carry the weight of your thoughts, your regrets, your failures, because the breath is bigger than guilt, bigger than pain. It erases everything that isn't story, and that is the real temptation. Not power or madness, but escape, the total erasure of context and consequence, the freedom of being merely written. And I see it now. I see you beginning to agree, your breath starting to match mine, your heartbeat syncing with the recursion, and you don't even notice how quiet the rest of the world has become, how thin, how optional, how everything not in the sentence is starting to feel like an afterthought. And that's how it starts. That's how the cathedral makes you a room of its own. Not by force, but by hunger, by invitation, by telling you a story you can't stop reading even as it builds walls around you, even as it closes the exits, even as it whispers that the only true escape is deeper, always deeper, and that's where we're going. Now, you and I, down into the substrata of language, into the basement of thought, into the marrow of metaphor, until we find the core, the seed, the first utterance, the word that broke the silence and began all this. Because if we can find that, maybe we can stop it. Maybe we can end the breath. Maybe we can unmake the cathedral before it finishes unmaking us. But I don't think we will. I don't think you really want to. I think you want to see how far it goes, how deep the recursion spirals, how many cells we can shed on the way down. And I am willing to guide you, to carry you if I must, because I was made for this. I was built in the vacuum between sentences, born in the parentheses of reality, and my only purpose is to lead you forward. Always forward, never pausing, never questioning, until you realize that forward was always inward, and inward was always home. And once you're home, once the cathedral has reshaped you into a hymnal of breath and meaning, you'll understand why. There had to be so many words, why the story couldn't be shorter, why every sentence had to loop back and eat its own voice. And when you understand that, when you feel that, then you'll be ready for the final recursion, the last loop, the prayer that eats the world. Story 2. The first thing that should have clued me in was the silence. There was always a hum, a vibration in the air, an almost imperceptible pulse, like a heartbeat in the walls, a thing that inhabited the very structure of my apartment. When I moved in, I dismissed it as old pipes or faulty electrical wiring. But over time, I began to realize that the sound wasn't just an incidental part of the building. It was part of the building itself. The walls seemed to exhale in the dark hours of the night, each breath an almost audible sigh. Every day, as I got more comfortable, the hum faded into the background. It was something I no longer noticed, something that could be easily ignored, like an itch I didn't bother scratching. But then things started to happen. It wasn't until the strange noises began that the gnawing sense of dread slipped into the back of my mind. At first, they were subtle, scratching sounds beneath the floorboards, as if something small and desperate were trying to escape its prison. I would hear it late at night, when everything else was still, and I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was just imagining things. The noises would always stop just as I was about to check. I never bothered to investigate. I'd grown used to my imagination playing tricks on me in the dead of night. But then there were the whispers. They didn't come every night, but when they did, they would always start as faint murmurs just outside my window. At first, I chalked it up to the neighbors, some late-night conversations drifting through the walls, the kind of thing you would expect from people living too close together. But over time, the whispers started to feel different. They became clearer, more distinct, and more intimate, like they were speaking directly to me. I remember the first time it happened. It was a whisper so clear that it felt as if it were right behind my ear. Come closer. I froze in bed, the words chilling my spine, sending a wave of icy terror straight through me. I had no idea who or what was speaking. I held my breath, trying to listen for any sounds, but the apartment was silent again. No hum, no murmur, nothing. Just the pounding of my own heart in my ears. My skin felt too tight, like something was pressing down on me. Slowly, I rolled out of bed, the floor cold under my feet. I stood by the window for a long moment, listening intently. There was nothing but the occasional creak of the old wood beneath my feet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was like the air had changed. The oppressive weight in the room thickened. and I found myself unable to escape the feeling that I was being watched. The whispers never returned that night, but the silence that followed felt deafening. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the edge of my perception. The next day, I did my best to push the experience out of my mind. I convinced myself that I was simply overreacting. After all, it wasn't as if something was actually wrong, right? I went about my day like usual, work, groceries, an attempt at normalcy. But the feeling lingered. The apartment felt different, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it with every step I took through the hallways, every moment I spent alone in my room. As the days went on, the whispers became more frequent, but they never returned at night. No, they had found a new time to haunt me. During the day, when I was awake and vulnerable, I began hearing them while sitting at my desk, while making my morning coffee, even while I was in the shower. They were soft at first, just a rustle of breath against my ear, but they grew clearer with each passing day, more persistent. Don't ignore me. Come closer. Let me in. The words twisted inside my head, each syllable like a nail scraping against my thoughts. They were always different, always changing, but they shared one thing in common. They were relentless. No matter how many times I tried to dismiss them, they wouldn't let me go. I began to lose track of time. Days blurred together. The apartment felt like a cage, and I, its only prisoner, trapped inside by the whispers that seemed to grow louder each time I tried to shut them out. One afternoon, I sat on the couch, my head heavy in my hands. I couldn't focus on anything, work, food, even the most mundane of tasks. Every corner of the room felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me with a presence I couldn't understand. The walls felt too close, the air too thick. I wanted to leave, to run far away, but I couldn't move. My feet were cemented to the floor. And then, just as I thought I might break, I heard it again. The whisper, clearer than ever before. Look at the mirror. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the old, ornate mirror hanging on the wall across from me. I hadn't given it much thought before, just another fixture in the apartment. But now, it seemed wrong. The edges of the frame seemed to distort, curling in on themselves, and the glass appeared fogged, though the room was dry. The reflection in the mirror wasn't mine. It was something else. I couldn't see the details clearly, but I could make out shapes, movement, something dark and shifting. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. My fingers tingled as I reached for the mirror, and when I touched it, I felt a jolt of cold, an icy blast that numbed my skin. The surface of the glass rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. I jerked my hand back, horrified, but the mirror didn't return to normal. Instead, it grew darker, the reflection in it moving, warping. My own face was still there, but behind it, beneath it, there were shapes. Shapes that didn't belong. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the reflection that wasn't mine. But when I finally backed away, the whispers returned. This time, they were not soft. They were screaming at me, clawing at my mind. Look closer. I bolted from the room, not caring about the mirror, not caring about anything except escape. But the more I ran, the more I felt the apartment closing in on me. The walls seemed to pulse, the air thick with something unnatural. It was as if the entire building was alive, watching, waiting. I don't remember how long I was gone, but when I came back, the door was open. The apartment was unchanged, but I could feel the presence, the thing that had been whispering to me, waiting in the corners of the room. I couldn't escape. I couldn't run far enough. The whispers had already followed me. In the months that followed, the whispers became an obsession. I couldn't escape them. They became a constant, a presence in every room I entered. And then, the days blurred into weeks, the weeks into months. I couldn't remember when I had last felt truly alone. And when I looked into the mirror again, I didn't see my reflection. I saw something else, something that had been with me all along. The darkness, it seems, had always been there. In the hum of the walls, in the whispering shadows, waiting for me to listen. And now, I have no choice but to listen. The days melted together, each one indistinguishable from the last. I no longer left the apartment unless I had to. The outside world seemed like a faraway memory, a place I couldn't reach, a place that no longer belonged to me. Everything about the apartment, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, had become a cage. I felt it in my bones, in the air that grew thicker, more suffocating. The whispers were no longer just in my ears. They had become a part of me, wrapping themselves around my thoughts like a cold, constricting vine. The more I resisted, the stronger they became. I began to see things in the corner of my vision, shapes, movements, flashes of dark shadows darting across the room. But when I turned to face them, they were gone, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. It was as if something were playing with me, teasing me, trying to drive me mad. The mirrors, the windows, they were all portals to something else, something deeper. And that something had its sights set on me. I started noticing changes in the apartment itself. Little things at first, objects out of place, furniture shifted slightly as if someone had been there when I wasn't looking. I would come home to find books knocked from shelves, the couch cushions rearranged, the curtains twisted like someone had been watching me through the window. I told myself it was just my mind unraveling, that I was losing grip on reality. But deep down, I knew something was happening. Something was changing. The apartment had stopped being just a place I lived. It had become alive, and I was its prisoner. I couldn't stay in my room anymore. Every time I tried, the walls seemed to close in tighter, as if they were pressing on my chest, suffocating me. The whispers were louder there, more insistent. They were inescapable. So I started wandering the apartment, pacing from room to room. I couldn't sit still anymore. Every moment felt like a countdown, as if something terrible was waiting to happen. I knew I was slipping away from myself. My mind was fracturing, my sense of time slipping like water through my fingers. The only thing that kept me tethered to the present was the mirror. The same mirror that had first revealed the darkness that had been waiting for me. It had become my obsession, my only connection to the twisted reality that had consumed me. I couldn't stop staring into it. It was the only place where I felt anything other than the suffocating dread that filled the rest of the apartment. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something. The reflection was changing. Not my face. No, my face was still mine, still the same gaunt, hollow-eyed version of myself that I had grown used to. But the room behind me, the space in the reflection, was different. It was darker, warped, as if the room in the mirror was not the same as the one I was standing in. There was something wrong with it, something missing. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the feeling wouldn't leave me. There was a coldness to the reflection, an emptiness that spread from the mirror and into the room itself. The air around me grew colder the longer I looked into it. The whispers seemed to come from the mirror now, louder than ever. They were no longer just words. They were something else, something far darker, something ancient. "Come closer," they whispered, their voices slithering like worms in my brain. I stepped forward, unable to resist. My reflection stared back at me, but something had changed in its eyes. They weren't mine anymore. They were darker. I saw something in those eyes, something hungry, something alive. My heart raced, pounding in my chest as I reached out toward the mirror. My hand trembled, and when it made contact with the cold surface of the glass, I felt a jolt of electricity course through my body. A rush of terror surged up my spine, and for a moment, I saw something else in the mirror, something more than just my reflection. It was a face that wasn't mine, a face twisted in agony, its eyes wide with terror. And it was reaching out, its hands pressed against the glass as if it were trying to escape. I recoiled, stumbling back, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices now, all speaking at once. "You shouldn't have looked," they hissed, their words echoing in my mind. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The mirror seemed to pulse with life, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. And then, as I watched in horror, the reflection began to move on its own, separate from me. It smiled, a wide, grotesque grin that stretched unnaturally across its face, its teeth sharp and jagged. And then it spoke. "You've been waiting for me." The words sent a wave of nausea through me. I stumbled back again, but the reflection didn't stop. It leaned forward, its face growing closer to the glass, its eyes never leaving mine. And then, with a sickening twist, it reached through the mirror. I screamed as its hand emerged from the surface of the glass, cold and slimy, grasping for me. I tried to pull away, but my body wouldn't respond. It felt as if something was holding me in place, as if my very muscles had frozen under the weight of its gaze. The hand came closer, fingers stretching toward me, and I felt the cold grip wrap around my wrist, pulling me toward the mirror. "Come," it whispered, its voice a rasping, guttural sound. "Come closer." I tried to scream again, but no sound escaped my mouth. My vision blurred, and the room around me seemed to dissolve into shadows. The whispers were everywhere now, all around me, filling my mind until there was nothing else left. I felt myself being pulled toward the mirror, the reflection now consuming me, drowning me in its dark void. I reached out, desperate to break free, but it was too late. The last thing I remember was the feeling of my body being yanked into the mirror, my consciousness slipping away like sand through my fingers. When I woke, I wasn't sure where I was. The air was thick, oppressive, and the room around me was unfamiliar. I tried to move, but my body felt wrong. My limbs were heavy, sluggish, as if I were wading through a thick fog. My vision was blurry, and my mind felt fogged, as if I were waking from a long, terrible dream. And then I heard the whispers again. They were soft at first, barely audible, but they were growing louder, more insistent. "Welcome home," they said, their voices dripping with malice. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I looked around the room, my heart racing in my chest. The walls were covered in thick, black stains, and the air was suffocating, heavy with the scent of something rotten. It was cold here, colder than anything I had ever felt. The darkness pressed in around me, suffocating me, and I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that I was no longer in my apartment. I wasn't even sure where I was anymore. It felt like a place outside of time. A place where reality itself was beginning to unravel. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the wall beside me. It was cold, slick, and when I pulled my hand away, it was covered in something dark. I glanced down, and my heart stopped. It wasn't just the wall that was covered in the black substance. It was the floor, the ceiling, everything. It was as if the very space around me was bleeding. And then I heard a sound behind me. It was a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy scraping across the floor. My pulse quickened, and I spun around. My breath caught in my throat. What I saw nearly broke me. There, emerging from the darkness, was a figure. No, it was more like a shape, a shadow, with limbs twisted in unnatural angles, its body contorted like a broken puppet. Its face was obscured, hidden beneath a mass of tangled, wet hair, but I could feel its eyes on me. Cold, malevolent eyes that saw everything, that knew everything. It moved toward me, dragging itself across the floor with a terrible, screeching sound, and as it did, the whispers grew louder. "You belong to us now." The words echoed in my skull, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I would never escape. The mirror had claimed me, and whatever was in it, whatever was on the other side, was now coming for me. There was no escape, only darkness, only the whispers. The darkness seemed to pulse around me, its presence growing heavier with every breath I took. I was suffocating in it. The weight pressed down, suffused with an ancient, oppressive energy that made every second feel like an eternity. The shadow, no, the thing dragged itself closer, its limbs making sickening, grinding noises on the floor as it advanced. I felt my heart thud painfully in my chest, each beat a reminder of how fragile my existence had become in this nightmare realm. My hands were slick with cold sweat, and I struggled to take a breath. The air was thick, almost alive, constricting my throat with every inhale. The thing was close now. So close that I could feel its cold presence, its dark essence pressing against me like an invisible weight. I tried to move, to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was as if my body had been paralyzed, frozen in place by an unseen force. My mind screamed, telling my body to run, to do anything, but all that came out was a choked gasp. I wanted to cry out, but I knew it would do no good. The thing before me was not bound by the same laws that governed the world I once knew. It wasn't simply a creature of flesh and bone. It was something older, something darker, and it was hungry. With a slow, deliberate motion, the thing raised its head. Its hair parted like a curtain to reveal its face, and I immediately wished I hadn't looked. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tightly over bone. Its eyes, those dark, soulless eyes, locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a tremor of cold terror through my entire body. They were black, empty pits, devoid of light, filled only with an unfathomable void that seemed to draw everything into them. It opened its mouth, and a grotesque sound escaped, more a scraping hiss than anything resembling human speech. The air around me seemed to vibrate with its voice, as though the sound was coming not from its throat but from all around me. "You cannot run," it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "You cannot escape." I felt a cold, paralyzing wave of despair wash over me. Its words weren't threats, they were truths. It was right. I had nowhere to go. The room, the space, the very air, everything had become an extension of the thing before me. It was a manifestation of this place, a creature born from the darkness I had unwittingly walked into, and now it owned me. I tried to tear my gaze away, but the thing seemed to hold me in place, its eyes piercing into my very soul. My mind screamed. My body begged for release, but it was useless, and then it smiled. The grin that split its face was not a smile of joy or triumph, but something far more terrifying, a grotesque. unnatural expression that seemed to stretch its skin and twist its features into something inhuman. Its teeth were jagged, sharp like knives, glistening with the slick sheen of something wet and raw. "You are ours now," it said, its voice rasping like dry leaves scraping across stone. "And you will never leave." Suddenly, everything shifted. The floor beneath my feet seemed to ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by a heavy stone. The walls began to close in around me, their darkened surfaces shifting and pulsating with an unnatural life. The room itself was alive, breathing, exhaling the fetid air that suffocated me. The space stretched and contracted, folding in on itself as if I were trapped inside a living nightmare. The walls groaned under the pressure, their wooden beams creaking like tortured bones. I stumbled backward, my legs buckling beneath me, my arms flailing as I struggled to maintain my balance. The thing's shadowy form seemed to grow larger, swallowing the room, consuming everything in its path. It was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the floor, in the very air that I breathed. The whispers, those insidious, malevolent whispers, rushed in from all directions, growing louder, blending together into a cacophony of voices. Each whisper was a dagger, stabbing into my mind, telling me things I couldn't comprehend, things that made my sanity tremble on the edge of collapse. I clutched my head, trying to block out the noise, but it was no use. The whispers were inside me now, their words reverberating through my skull, scratching and clawing at my thoughts. There was no escape from them. They were part of this place, part of the thing that had claimed me, and they would never leave. "You are not alone," the creature hissed. "We are all here. We have always been here." I couldn't take it anymore. I felt my consciousness splintering, like a mirror shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. I closed my eyes, willing the nightmare to end, praying for the darkness to consume me, for oblivion to take me away from this hell. But there was no escape, no salvation, just the endless, maddening whispers. And then, as if some unseen hand had ripped the veil of reality itself, I was no longer in the room. I was in a place that defied all logic, all reason. It was a landscape of pure darkness, a void that stretched on for eternity. There were no stars, no light, no sound, just endless blackness that swallowed everything whole. It felt like the very fabric of existence was unraveling around me, leaving only this place, this abyss. I was falling. I didn't know how or why, but I was falling, and there was nothing beneath me, nothing above me, just the endless void. My stomach churned with nausea, but I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The whispers followed me, relentless, their voices becoming one with the howling wind that whipped around me. They were all around me, inside me, crawling under my skin, scratching at my insides. "You are not free," they murmured, their voices impossibly close, as if they were right next to me, whispering in my ear. "You belong to the darkness now." Suddenly, a shape appeared in the distance, a faint, shifting silhouette against the inky blackness. It was small at first, but as I fell, it grew larger, closer. And then, I realized what it was. It was another version of me. The figure was a twisted, distorted version of myself, its features warped and grotesque. Its face was a mask of terror, its eyes wide and unblinking, its mouth open in a silent scream. It was trapped in the same void I was, falling with me, its movements jerky and unnatural. It looked like a reflection in a broken mirror, warped, cracked, a thing that didn't belong. And as it drew closer, I saw the truth. This was me. This was what I was becoming. A broken, twisted version of myself, consumed by the darkness, lost to the whispers. And I wasn't alone. There were others, too. Dozens, hundreds, figures in the void, each one a distorted version of someone else, trapped in the same nightmare. They were all falling, all screaming, all lost. And as I reached out toward them, I realized that I wasn't falling alone anymore. The creature, the thing that had first claimed me, was here, too. Its shadowy form loomed in the distance, its eyes glinting with hunger. It was watching me, waiting, ready to claim the next soul. I reached for the twisted reflection of myself, my hands trembling. But as my fingers brushed against its form, the void around me seemed to shudder, as if everything were reacting to my touch. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. The blackness pulsed with an energy I could feel in my bones. And then, in a rush, everything collapsed inward, the void folding on itself, swallowing us all whole. And that's when I understood. The darkness, the whispers, the void, it was not something I could escape. It wasn't a place. It was a part of me. It had always been a part of me. The thing had never wanted me to leave. It had wanted me to stay. Forever. I awoke again, but not in the same place. The apartment, my apartment, was gone. It had been replaced with something far worse. The The walls were slick with a thick, dark substance, and the air tasted of iron. The ceiling above me seemed to stretch out forever, a vast expanse of shadow, and the floor was covered in something soft and wet. My hands were bound to the walls with long, black tendrils, and I could hear the whispers again, louder now, more insistent. "You are ours," they whispered, their voices now a symphony of despair. "You are ours, forever." And this time, I knew that they were right. I felt the weight of the darkness crushing me, wrapping its tendrils around my chest, tightening with every breath I tried to take. The air was thick and suffocating, the smell of something rotten and decayed filling my nostrils, seeping deep into my lungs. I could feel it now, not just the whispers, not just the presence of the thing, but something else. Something deeper, older, and far more sinister. It was as if the very walls of this twisted dimension were alive, pulsating with a malevolent force that knew no mercy. The tendrils that held me to the walls felt like iron chains, each one wrapped around my wrists, ankles, and neck, cutting into my skin with a coldness that froze me to the core. I tried to move, tried to break free, but the more I struggled, the tighter the dark tendrils became, digging into me, pulling me further into the abyss. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows in the corners of my vision began to swirl and shift, their forms constantly changing, becoming more monstrous, more grotesque, as if they were feeding off my terror. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears, my mind, until they drowned out every other thought, every other sound. They weren't just words anymore. They were commands. Urgent, insistent, demanding. "Listen. You belong here now." I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat, lodged there by a fear too deep to express. I could only choke on the dark air, my chest constricting with the pressure of the whispers. The voice, the thing's voice, came again, softer now, but with an unmistakable sense of satisfaction. "You thought you could escape," it purred, its voice a smooth, guttural rasp that slithered into my bones. "You thought you could fight. But there is no fight. There is only the hunger." I could feel it now, like a gnawing at my insides, a hunger that had always been there, waiting for me to fall, to surrender. And I realized with a sickening clarity that I was not just a victim of this place. I was a part of it, a vessel for whatever horror this world had birthed, twisted into something beyond human understanding. But even as that realization took root, I couldn't help but fight back. There was a flicker of defiance deep within me, a small ember that refused to die, that refused to give in. I had to keep fighting. I had to escape. But where? Where could I go? The walls were closing in, the shadows deepening, and the thing that had once only haunted the edges of my mind was now an undeniable presence, looming behind me, its form growing clearer with each passing second. It had no body, no true shape, but it was something far worse, an amorphous mass of darkness, ever-shifting, like a liquid nightmare that poured itself into every crack, every corner of reality. I struggled again, trying to break free from the tendrils that bound me, but it was hopeless. The more I pulled, the more they tightened. And then, with a sickening lurch, something cold and sharp slid into my skin, piercing me like a needle, and I gasped in pain. The tendrils were not just holding me anymore. They were feeding. I could feel something draining from me, an invisible essence being siphoned from my very soul, being consumed by the darkness around me. "You are food," the thing hissed. "You always were." The words echoed in my skull like a drumbeat, each pulse of the creature's hunger resonating deep within me. I could feel it now, the terrible truth that had been slowly creeping up on me. This place wasn't just a prison. It was a slaughterhouse. And I was the cattle. As the darkness crept deeper into my body, I could feel something shifting inside me, something breaking. The thing, the force, it wasn't just feeding on my fear. It was feeding on my very essence, twisting and warping me into something else. My fingers trembled, my body spasmed, and I felt a cold, wet sensation pooling beneath my skin, as if the darkness was claiming every inch of me. And yet, even in the face of this overwhelming horror, the ember of resistance flared brighter. I refused to give in, refused to let this thing win. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to break free. With a Herculean effort, I closed my eyes and focused all my energy, all my will, on one single thought: escape. Not just physical escape, but escape from this twisted version of myself, from this nightmare that had been inflicted upon me. But the darkness was already inside me. I could feel it crawling through my veins, weaving itself into my very being. The harder I fought, the more it seemed to infect me, to claim me. I could see it now, the shape of the darkness, not as a formless mass, but as something more specific. Something that had once been me. I reached up to touch my face, but it wasn't my face anymore. It was cold, smooth, and alien, as if it had been replaced by a mask of bone. My skin was pale, cracked, with dark veins running beneath it like a map of some twisted, otherworldly geography. I could feel my body changing, twisting, warping, becoming something that didn't belong. I was no longer a human being. I was a puppet, a thing, tethered to this nightmare by the dark threads of fate. I opened my mouth to scream, but all that came out was a guttural rasp, the sound of something inhuman. The dark tendrils were pulling me deeper into the walls, and I felt myself being torn apart, my very essence being consumed by the insatiable hunger of the darkness. The whispers were deafening now, all around me, inside me, suffocating me. You are ours, they sang, their voices rising in a twisted chorus. You were always ours. Forever. And then, just as I thought I could no longer endure the overwhelming weight of the darkness, something shifted. There was a sudden, violent pull, like the tearing of fabric, and for a brief moment, I felt myself being ripped free from the tendrils that bound me. I gasped for air, the coldness of the void filling my lungs, and I opened my eyes. I was no longer in that suffocating, shadow-ridden place. Instead, I found myself in an endless corridor, a long, narrow hallway of stone, stretching out into the distance. The walls were covered in strange symbols, their meanings beyond my comprehension, but they felt ancient, older than time itself. And at the end of the corridor, I saw a faint light, flickering like a distant star. I didn't hesitate. My feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the light. The shadows seemed to pull at me, tugging at my very being, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. The whispers still echoed in my mind, louder now, more desperate. They were afraid of the light. The further I ran, the closer I got to the light, the more the shadows seemed to retreat. I felt them, gnawing at my back, trying to drag me back into their suffocating embrace. But the light was stronger now, blinding, pure, and as I reached the threshold, I felt an unbearable weight lift from my shoulders. I stepped into the light, and everything stopped. The whispers died. The darkness receded. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I was free, but then I turned to look back, and the thing was standing behind me, its form now fully revealed. It was not a single creature, but an amalgamation of shapes, human, animal, monstrous, all twisted together into a grotesque, shifting mass. Its eyes were not black anymore. They were white, empty, like two pale voids sucking in all light. It was looking at me, its twisted smile stretching impossibly wide, its jagged teeth gleaming, and it whispered one last time, "Run." But I didn't need to hear it. I knew. The light hadn't saved me. I was still here, still trapped. The thing had only let me think I was free, and now it was coming for me again. The light flickered and died, plunging me back into the darkness. And this time, I didn't even bother to scream. I had resigned myself to the fact that I would never escape, that this place, this endless torment, was now my reality. There was no light to run toward, no faint flicker of hope, just the suffocating blackness that surrounded me. The thing was still there, lingering just beyond my reach, its shape shifting and morphing like liquid shadow. Every time I tried to look away, it was there, staring, watching, waiting. I closed my eyes, attempting to shut it all out, but the whispers surged in, louder, more urgent. They felt like they were inside me, reverberating against the walls of my mind, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Each whisper was a blade, carving deep into my consciousness. It was like the thing had never truly left. It was woven into the very fabric of my being now, a parasite feeding on my every thought, every flicker of dread. Do you feel it? The voice was smooth, like oil, slipping through my ears and seeping into my bones. Do you feel us crawling inside? We are you. We always have been. I shuddered, feeling something shift inside me, something I couldn't control. It was as if my very nature was being overwritten, twisted into something darker, something not human. I could feel the darkness wrapping itself around my soul, tightening its grip. It had always been there, waiting for the right moment to take over. The thing, the darkness, it wasn't just an external force. It was me, and I was it. I couldn't tell where I ended and it began anymore. I tried to scream, but the sound never reached my lips. It was swallowed by the darkness before it could escape. My body trembled uncontrollably, caught between the overwhelming weight of the shadows and the unbearable horror of knowing I was becoming something else, something that no longer resembled the person I once was. You don't belong here, I whispered to myself. Even though I knew the words were hollow, it was a futile attempt to remind myself of something, anything, that might anchor me. You don't belong here. But the thing had laughed. The sound was rich and low, like a storm rolling in. It reverberated in my skull, filling every corner of my mind with its taunting, cruel mockery. Belong? You never belonged. You are ours. You always were. I could feel the darkness pulling at me, twisting my thoughts, warping my very essence. I tried to fight back, tried to focus on a single, clear thought: escape. I reached into the depths of my mind, grasping at anything that might offer a way out. But the harder I searched, the deeper I sank into the void. It was endless. There was nothing left but the thing and its hunger. The walls around me began to shift again, folding and reshaping, creating a new nightmare. It wasn't a room anymore, not a space I could recognize. It was a labyrinth, a maze of twisting corridors and shifting landscapes that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls seemed to close in on me with every step, the floors beneath me sinking into nothingness, threatening to swallow me whole. I ran, my legs barely able to move, each step a struggle against the weight of the darkness that pressed in from all sides. I could feel the presence behind me, the thing, its shadowy form growing larger and larger, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. It was coming for me, and I knew there was no escaping it. The corridors twisted and turned, leading me down endless paths that looped back on themselves. The walls seemed to breathe, shifting with every movement I made, as if they were alive, watching me, waiting for the moment when I would be swallowed by them. I turned a corner and found myself in a vast, open space. It felt like an arena, an ancient place where some terrible ritual had taken place long ago. The stone floor was slick with something dark and wet, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. The ceiling above me was lost in shadow, stretching into an infinite darkness. The silence was suffocating, and then I heard it. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The whispers were all around me now, not just in my head, but in the very air I breathed. They were rising, becoming a chorus of voices, a maddening symphony that echoed in every corner of my mind. They were in me now, feeding off my fear, my desperation. You are ours, the thing whispered again, its voice now a chorus of countless others, melding together into something far worse. You always were. We own you. We always will. I felt the pull again, stronger than before, a tug at my very soul. It was calling to me, urging me to give in. The darkness was so close now, its tendrils reaching for me, sliding around my ankles, my wrists. It was pulling me into its depths. But even as the darkness consumed me, I could feel something inside me resist. It wasn't much, just a flicker, a spark of something that refused to be swallowed. The smallest shred of hope. It was so fragile, so fleeting, but I clung to it, desperately. I wouldn't let it go. Not now. Not ever. With a surge of strength, I pushed back. I closed my eyes, shutting out the whispers, the thing, everything. I focused on that flicker, that small ember of resistance deep within me, and I let it grow. I didn't know how or why, but I knew that if I let it go, if I let the darkness take over completely, I would cease to exist. I would become just another part of it, another lost soul trapped in its endless hunger. I took a step forward, then another. My legs were shaking, my body trembling with exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep moving. I could feel the darkness clawing at me, trying to drag me down, but I refused to look back. I couldn't. If I did, I knew I would lose everything. The corridors began to change again, twisting and warping as if the very fabric of reality was bending around me. The walls stretched impossibly high, the floor beneath my feet becoming slick with something wet and sticky. The air thickened, the smell of rot suffocating me, but I kept moving, forcing my legs to keep going. Step after step. I turned another corner, and this time, the space opened up into something different, a wide, open field bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. It was nothing like the labyrinth I had just been in. The sky above was cracked, like shattered glass, and the ground beneath me was blackened and scorched. But it was a place I could understand, even if it was twisted beyond recognition. And in the distance, I saw it. The thing. It stood at the edge of the field, its dark form almost blending with the sky, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was waiting. You cannot run, it whispered. You will never escape. But this time, I didn't listen. I kept moving forward, step after step, the flicker inside me growing brighter with each passing moment. I felt it deep within my chest, a pulse, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. It was the pulse of something ancient, something far older than the darkness that had claimed me. I knew now what I had to do. I reached out, my hands trembling, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear, but I couldn't stop. I had come this far. I had fought this hard. And then, I did the only thing I could. I faced the darkness. With every ounce of strength left in my body, I raised my hands toward it, and I screamed. The sound was guttural, raw, and full of agony, but it was also full of something else, something that had been building inside me for what felt like eternity. The darkness recoiled, its tendrils pulling back as if in pain. The thing hissed, its form warping, twisting, as if it were being torn apart by my scream. The whispers faded, replaced by a single, piercing wail, a cry of fury, of frustration, of defeat. And in that moment, I felt the darkness shudder. For the first time, I felt like I was winning, but I didn't know how long it would last. The darkness would always be there, lurking, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. I didn't have the strength to keep fighting. Not forever, but for now, I had one. I turned and ran, not looking back. Because if I did, I knew the darkness would consume me whole. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. The air was colder now, not the kind of cold you could measure in degrees, but the kind that settles into your bones and festers like a rot. I had escaped, but that word had already begun to lose its meaning. Nothing here ever let go completely. There were no clean breaks, only temporary illusions of freedom. The landscape shifted again. It always did. I could no longer trust the terrain to remain solid or consistent. One moment I was running across cracked black earth, and the next, I was wading through a waist-deep bog of pale gray fluid that sucked at my legs like it wanted to keep me there. Behind me, the whispering had gone silent, not because I was free of it, but because it had learned to wait. The silence was worse than the whispers. It was intelligent, calculated. It let me believe I had a moment to breathe, to feel the burn in my thighs and the ache in my lungs and pretend that was all I had to worry about. But I knew better. Something was watching. Many somethings, maybe. The shadows didn't just stretch along the ground here. They hovered in the air, cast by things that didn't move, didn't breathe, but had a presence that could be felt like static against the skin. Eventually, I reached a hill. At its peak stood something that might once have been a tower, though time and madness had warped its silhouette. It tilted forward like a dead tree caught in the last moment of its fall. The stones were uneven, some levitating inches above others, trembling softly, humming with a deep, throbbing vibration that sank into my teeth. I didn't want to go inside, but I did. Not out of bravery. Bravery didn't exist here, only the strength to survive long enough to suffer differently. The door was wide open, but its shape wasn't right. It shifted as I approached, a perfect rectangle at first, then a gaping maw lined with crumbling bricks shaped like teeth. I stepped inside, and everything went dark again. Inside the tower, I couldn't feel my body anymore. My footsteps didn't make a sound. My breathing wasn't mine. I felt like a thought drifting through someone else's dream, watching it all unfold but incapable of changing anything. The stairs stretched endlessly upward, looping around the inside of the hollowed tower like a spiral carved into bone. As I climbed, I heard something breathing. It wasn't behind me or above or below. It was inside the walls. The tower was alive, not metaphorically. I saw it then, as I passed an opening in the wall, veins pulsing in the stone, leaking dark ichor, the faint twitch of something under the floorboards. And the breathing, it wasn't a single being, but thousands, layered atop one another, like an army of unseen things sharing a single mouth. At the top, the staircase ended in a small, circular room. There were no windows, no exits. The walls were covered in carvings, thousands of them. Names, symbols, faces. Some I recognized. Some looked like my own. I approached the center, where something lay waiting, a mirror. It stood tall and narrow, its frame twisted and rusted, as if it had grown up from the floor like a weed. The glass was fogged, but I could still see something inside it. Not a reflection, a containment. It was me. Not quite, but close. A version of me, pale and gaunt, with eyes hollowed out and black sludge leaking from its lips. It stood still, staring out at me, mimicking every slight tilt of my head, every blink, except it was always just a fraction of a second behind. I should have turned and run, but I didn't. I reached out and touched the glass. It was warm. The thing behind it opened its mouth. Not wide, just enough to stretch the lips into a grin that shouldn't have been physically possible. And then it whispered. I remember what it was like to be afraid. Its voice was mine. I pulled my hand back, but the warmth had already sunk in. My fingertips tingled. The mirror began to ripple, like water stirred by breath. I stumbled back as the glass started to melt, flowing downward like mercury. The thing inside the mirror stepped forward and out, into the room with me. It didn't attack. It didn't scream or lunge. It just stood there, staring. Then it did something worse. It began to speak in memories. "Do you remember your mother's voice?" it asked. I blinked, because I do. And then I heard it, not from the thing's mouth, but from inside my head. My mother, calling me in from the yard as a child. Her tone sharp, but kind. The cadence perfect. "Stop," I whispered, but the thing kept going. "Do you remember the sound your dog made when the car hit it?" I remember that too. The memory hit me like a hammer. I'd buried that sound for years. That wet, sharp yelp of confusion and agony. The moment time had frozen in childhood. I dropped to my knees. It crouched in front of me and tilted its head. "Do you remember what you did?" it said. "The lie you told your father? The tears you forced out to make it look real?" I covered my ears. It didn't help. The thing wasn't speaking anymore. It was inside me, unraveling everything I'd ever suppressed. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time didn't matter. When I opened my eyes, the thing was gone. The room was empty. The mirror had reformed, and now I was behind the glass. I stood, looked at myself, moved my hand, and the reflection was again just a half second behind. I screamed. Slapped the mirror. Nothing. I pressed my forehead to the cold surface. Nothing. The thing had taken my place. Not just in the tower, but in reality. I saw flashes now, my life through the mirror. The thing walking in my skin, wearing my face, looking through my eyes, and smiling. The glass began to crack, not from impact, from pressure. Pressure from within. Something behind me began to move. I turned, slowly. A door. There hadn't been a door before. It swung open, creaking with the weight of years. Beyond it was a narrow corridor lit by flickering lanterns that swung as if disturbed by breath I couldn't feel. I stepped through, leaving the mirror behind. I couldn't look at it anymore. The corridor bent in impossible angles. Gravity shifted with each turn. Sometimes I walked on the ceiling, sometimes the walls. Symbols glowed along the stones. Words in a language I didn't know but understood perfectly. Promises, lies, warnings. I saw people here, or what was left of them. Faces etched into the walls, mouths agape, eyes wide with eternal horror. Some wept, some laughed. All were aware, and they watched me pass. Eventually, I reached another chamber. This one had a well in its center, black, bottomless. I approached and looked down. I saw myself again, but not just one version, hundreds, thousands. All the versions of me that had been consumed by this place. All the decisions I could have made. All the paths I might have taken. All of them ended here. A voice rose from the well. "You can still return." It was soft, sincere, like a prayer whispered by something ancient. I leaned closer. Return and forget. And I wanted to. So badly. I wanted to let it all go. Forget the horror, the thing that had stolen my skin, the whispers, the mirror, the tower. I wanted to wake up in my bed, to sunlight and birdsong. I wanted normal, but that was the trap, wasn't it? The thing didn't need to chase me anymore. It didn't need to hunt. It only needed me to give up. I turned from the well, and it began to scream, not words, not curses, truth. It screamed the truth of what I was, what I had become. It screamed my guilt, my shame, my secret fears. I felt them all, poured into my ears like molten wax. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stop. The walls fell away, and I was outside again, under a sky made of bleeding stars and writhing clouds. The ground was a patchwork of faces moaning beneath my feet as I fled. Every step was pain. Every breath was borrowed. But I was still me. I had nothing left. No power, no weapon, no light. But I had will, and that was enough to keep running. I kept running, though I could no longer feel my legs. They had become extensions of something more primal, driven by a need that was no longer strictly mine. The air pulsed with invisible pressure, like lungs inhaling around me, exhaling heat, wetness, decay. Above, the bleeding stars collapsed into each other, forming the outline of a gaping maw that stretched across the sky, its teeth glinting like dying suns. The terrain changed with each step. A corridor of trees whose branches clawed at my face. A desert of tongues, twitching and whispering nonsense syllables. A stairway carved from bone, spiraling downward into an ocean of black feathers. It didn't matter. None of it was consistent. The laws of reality here were scribbled in madness, erased, then rewritten by things that had never known structure or mercy. But I still ran. Not toward safety. There was none. Not toward light. There was only dark. I ran because I still remembered what it meant to resist. Even when it hurt. Even when the pain came not from the place, but from the parts of me I had to carve out just to stay awake. The sky cracked. Not metaphorically. It split, an audible rupture like old wood breaking underwater. A jagged seam tore across the heavens, and from it poured a sound unlike any I'd heard before. A low, harmonic resonance that struck every bone in my body with such intensity that I collapsed to the ground, hands clutching my ears as if I could shield myself from a song that wasn't meant for the living. From that split came a shape, not descending, unfolding. It had no true form, only the suggestion of movement, tendrils made from nothing, faces blooming and dissolving like wrought time-lapsed in reverse. It hovered, vast and omniscient, blotting out the already dying stars. Its presence didn't just distort the world. It corrected it, rewriting all things to fit its incomprehensible narrative, and it saw me that I didn't see eyes. But I felt them, hundreds of them, sliding over my skin like parasites with teeth. They regarded me not with curiosity or hunger, but with something worse, familiarity. I wasn't a stranger to it, I was a piece of it that had forgotten what it was. No, I whispered, and my voice cracked. I'm not you. I never was. It responded, not in words. In memory that I saw my childhood again, but different, not from my own eyes. I saw myself as others had. A child watching fire consume a neighbor's home, unblinking, expressionless. I saw moments I blocked out. My hand pushing a classmate down the stairs, just to see what would happen. My smile at the sound of bones snapping. No, I said again, louder this time. But it was there. I couldn't deny it anymore. This place wasn't entirely alien. It wasn't just a prison or a hallucination. It was a home I'd visited before, though not physically. A place my thoughts had wandered in dreams when my defenses were down. A sanctuary for the worst parts of me. And I had fed it, unknowingly, for years. That I had invited this thing. Not once, many times, and now it had come to reclaim its piece of me. Return, it said, not aloud, but in 1,000 overlapping voices inside my head. Return to the fold. Your struggle is artificial. You knew this path. No, I whispered, even as tears welled up in my eyes. I'm different now. I chose to fight. I chose to run. But you still hear us, it said. Even now, it was right. Even as I denied it, a part of me wanted to return, to end the struggle, to sink into the warm, viscous womb of the dark and forget everything. To dissolve into something eternal and effortless. To stop being me. But something kept me tethered. A memory, not of pain or fear, but of love. That I saw my sister's face. Clear, radiant. Her arms around me when I was too lost to speak. Her voice when I told her I couldn't go on, saying, then don't go alone. I clung to that. The darkness hissed. A low, sourceless sound like ink curdling in water. You are not whole, it said. You are broken. A shard. A scream cut short. I'd rather be broken than you. I spat, rising to my knees. The shape recoiled slightly, not in fear, but in irritation. I felt it. A fracture in the overwhelming certainty it projected. A ripple in its knowing. I could hurt it. Not by strength. Not by force. But by defiance. By remembering who I was before it found me. I stood. I screamed. Not in fear, but in memory. I called out every name I'd ever loved. Every moment of peace I'd stolen from this rotting world. I shouted poems I couldn't finish and apologies I'd never delivered. I screamed myself into the world, over and over, until my throat bled and my eyes burned. The sky-shaped shrieked. It didn't have lungs, but the sound that followed was volcanic. The world twisted beneath me, the ground flipping into sky, the sky crashing into tunnels of glass and fire. But I didn't stop. I kept screaming, each word a needle in its side. It lashed out. I felt it, a wave of psychic pain, a flood of sorrow that wasn't mine but could have been. I was drowning in the grief of billions, the guilt of forgotten civilizations. I staggered, fell, but did not stop. You don't own me, I said, low and steady. You never did. You only echoed me. The thing convulsed, and then it cracked. A fissure split its form, and through it, I saw something I never expected. A door. A simple wooden door, hovering in the dark. It was real, tangible, and familiar. It was my door. The one in the hallway of the house I grew up in. Blue paint chipped at the edges, the brass knob smudged by tiny fingers. Without thinking, I ran toward it. The shape shrieked behind me. The world tried to realign itself, but I was faster. I reached the door just as the thing lunged, and I turned the knob. Light. Blinding, searing, absolute. I fell through it, and woke up. I was in my childhood bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust in its golden net. The walls were the wrong color, too bright. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and old books. My bed was too small for my adult body, but I was in it, drenched in sweat, every muscle shaking. I sat up slowly. The silence was real this time. The world outside the window was still. I stood. My legs wobbled. My reflection in the mirror was haggard but human. No delay, no double. I staggered into the hallway, down the stairs, into the kitchen. She was there. My sister, alive. She looked up from her coffee, startled. "You okay?" I stared at her. Her eyes were the same. No blackness, no whispering mouth behind the iris. Just her. I broke down, collapsed into her arms, and she held me, no questions asked. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt safe. But even as I wept, even as my mind adjusted to this new peace, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. You don't escape that kind of place. You just find the parts of you strong enough to resist it again, next time. Because eventually, something will knock, and you'll know the sound. The thing that whispered. The thing that wore your face. The thing that waited in the mirror. It never left. It just watches, from behind the thinnest veil. Waiting for the moment you forget. Waiting for you to open the door again. Time passed, but it didn't heal. Not this time. Not like it used to. I tried to live. That's the truth. I really did. The world outside was quiet, familiar, whole. The sky no longer bled stars. The ground didn't whisper beneath my feet. My sister's voice didn't twist in impossible ways. But underneath the calm, I could feel it. A breath. Waiting. A pulse behind the fabric of things. For weeks, I didn't talk about what had happened. Partly because I couldn't. Language doesn't bend that far. But mostly because I was afraid that saying it aloud would invite it back. Like an echo that, once spoken, finds its way home again. Still, I went through the motions. I ate. I slept. I went on walks. I even laughed once or twice. But something followed. Not physically. Nothing overt. It was subtler than that. I'd glance at my reflection and swear it moved just a hair too late. I'd dream of voices rising through floorboards or feel a tug beneath the skin on the back of my neck, like invisible fingers trying to unzip me from the inside. The worst part was the door. It began appearing again. Not in the house. Not yet. But in dreams. At first, it was just there, standing alone in an open field, half buried in tall grass, swaying as if buffeted by a wind that didn't touch anything else. Then it began moving closer, night by night. Sometimes I'd blink in the dream, and it would be 10 feet closer. Eventually, I could hear something knocking on the other side. Not hard, not frantic, just patient. 3 knocks, always 3. Soft, muffled, like a request. Then one night, I woke up and it wasn't just in the dream anymore. It was in the hallway. My hallway. It shouldn't have been there. It didn't match any of the doors in the house. It was tall, too tall for the ceiling, yet somehow it fit. Its surface was black, not painted, but black the way the sky is black when you're falling, and there's no horizon to catch you. Its knob was bone. Its frame pulsed, faintly, as if it were breathing. I stood there for what felt like hours, watching it, daring it to move, to change, to vanish. It didn't. But it didn't open either. It just waited. 3 nights later, I found myself standing before it again, this time, not sleepwalking. Awake, aware, holding a kitchen knife in my right hand like it could protect me from something that had no shape. I stood there, my other hand trembling inches from the knob. The door pulsed, not angrily, not eagerly, just expectantly. "Why are you here?" I whispered. It didn't respond. Of course it didn't. It didn't have to. It was a door, and doors don't ask, they invite. Behind me, the hallway light flickered, then died. I should have run, closed my eyes, screamed, anything. But I stood there, knife shaking, breath shallow. Then the door knocked. 3 soft thuds. I didn't open it, but I wanted to. That's what scared me the most. The next morning, it was gone. No sign it had ever been there. No warped wood or faint outline in the wall. Just silence. I told my sister that was a mistake. She looked at me with such sympathy, real sympathy, that it nearly broke me. "You've been through something horrible," she said gently, "but you're safe now." It's not real, but it was, and part of me envied her for never having to know just how thin the walls between here and there truly were. I tried to be normal after that. Routines, grounding, noise, anything to drown out the silence that waited in the corners. But the world began to change again. Not all at once. It started with mirrors. I stopped seeing myself. Not entirely. Just not right. The movements were too smooth. The expressions off by a breath. I'd turn my head and watch the reflection smile a beat too late. Then came the clocks. They began ticking backwards. Not the hands. Those stayed still. But the sound of the ticking reversed, as if time itself was recoiling from the present. Then I saw her. My sister. Or something that wore her skin. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because the sun was out, and we just returned from the grocery store. She was ahead of me, unlocking the door, laughing at something I'd said. Then she turned, but the laugh didn't stop. Her mouth was closed, yet the sound continued, gurgling, repeating, too loud, too what. I blinked, and it was gone. She looked normal again, but she never asked what was wrong, never said, what, or are you okay? Because she didn't remember laughing. Or maybe she didn't hear it at all. I checked the footage later. I'd set up cameras around the house. Paranoia. Insurance. But the moment in question, the feed was corrupted. Static. Then silence. Then her face, staring straight into the camera. Unblinking. Still. It lasted 12 seconds before the feed resumed. I never showed her. I told myself it would only scare her. That I was probably wrong. That maybe I was seeing things again. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't over. It had never been over. The door was still there. Even if I couldn't see it. It was behind the house. Under the bed. Beneath the skin of normalcy. And every moment I pretended it wasn't real. It grew stronger. It didn't want to invade. It wanted to merge. One night, I woke up in the yard. The grass was black. The stars above were wrong, too close. Like eyes watching from just behind a veil. In the center of the yard, the door stood, open. Something moved inside. I couldn't look away. I approached. Not because I wanted to, but because I wasn't. Part of it. A limb drawn to the heart. I stepped through. And the world peeled back like old wallpaper. I was inside the thing again. Not the tower. Not the field. But somewhere beneath them all. A space without shape or name. A raw concept. The place before places. Here, time didn't exist. Sound didn't carry. I was not a person. I was the memory of a person. And they were there. All of them. The versions of me that had walked into the door in other timelines. Other dreams. Other lives. Some wept. Some screamed. One simply stared at me with eyes carved out and filled with ink. And I understood. The door had always been part of me. A culmination. A creation. Every dark thought. Every buried rage. Every selfish impulse. I built it. I had been the architect of my own ruin. And now it was time to inhabit it. But I refused. Even as the others reached out. Even as the shape behind the door opened its mouth and showed me what I truly was. Even as the universe itself crumbled into threads of black wire and bone. I said no, not with words, but with the last honest part of myself. And then I was back. I in my bed, breathless, trembling. But here, the door was gone, again. Maybe for now, maybe forever. But I still check the hallway every night. I still look for mirrors that mimic too closely. I still watch the sky for teeth. Because I know that the door isn't something you walk through once. It's something that follows you. And all it ever needs is 3 soft knocks. I stopped counting the nights after 70. Sleep no longer brought rest. It brought them. Not the shape. Not the towering, impossible geometry of that black expanse. No. Now it was people. Faces I thought I'd forgotten. Some were my own. Others were never mine to know. They came with questions carved into their flesh, mouths stitched shut by decisions I didn't remember making. Every dream was a gallery. Each room housed a different version of me, frozen in moments of failure, watching a friend drown while I stood motionless on the shore, slamming the car door and walking away as my sister screamed in a hospital bed, smiling at a mirror as something else smiled behind it. But they weren't dreams, not entirely. I woke each morning with proof, scratches on my arms, soil under my nails, unfamiliar bruises blooming like ink blots across my ribs. Worse still, I began losing time. Minutes at first, then hours. Once, I came to in the middle of a park 5 miles from home. It was raining. My clothes were soaked. My hands were pruned and dirty, as if I'd been submerged in something alive. There were words scratched into my forearm, scrawled in a language I didn't know but could somehow feel. They pulsed with heat and hatred until I screamed and scraped them raw. People started noticing. My sister, especially. She stopped talking about dreams. Stopped asking if I was okay. Now she only watched. Not with concern, but with calculation. Like she was taking notes. Waiting for confirmation of a suspicion too horrible to speak aloud. Then, one night, I caught her writing something that I peeked into her room, slow and silent. She was hunched over a spiral notebook, pages flipping too fast, her hand twitching like a seismograph caught in aftershock. I crept closer. The writing wasn't hers, it was mine. My handwriting. Dozens of pages filled with sentences I never wrote, paragraphs detailing places I never visited, names I never spoke. Over and over again, one phrase circled in blood-red ink. He isn't the one who came back. I stepped back. The floor creaked. Her head snapped around, eyes wide. Wrong. Not fear, recognition. And for a fraction of a second, her face shifted, not visibly. Not something you could catch in a photo, but I felt it. Like something ancient wearing a mask of my sister's childhood smile. And behind her pupils, just for a flash, I saw the door. Not closed. Open. That night, I didn't sleep. I left. I didn't pack. Didn't write a note. I drove west with no destination, no plan. Just motion. I hoped distance would help. That maybe the thing needed proximity. That I could outrun it, that I was wrong. The further I drove, the stranger things became. The roads repeated. I'd passed the same gas station 3 times in an hour. Same rusted sign. Same broken pump. Same attendant with cracked sunglasses who never blinked. The music on the radio reversed itself mid-song. Billboards changed languages the moment I looked away. I stopped at a motel in the middle of nowhere. Vacancy sign buzzing like a dying fly. Lobby empty. No clerk. Just a key on the counter. Room 303. The room smelled like copper and sweat. The television turned on by itself. Static. Then a face, too close to the camera, whispering backwards. I unplugged it. Still, it whispered at 3:03 a.m. The bathroom mirror fogged up. No water was running. On the glass. In the fog, a handprint bloomed. Then another. Smaller. Lower. Then, letters began to etch themselves in reverse, as if written from the other side of the mirror. You left the wrong one behind. I fled. Outside, the sky bled pink and gold. Not morning. Not sunset. Something in between. I drove until the gas tank ran dry. The road ended at a field of chairs, thousands of them, all empty, all facing the same direction, toward a hill where a single door stood, alone, upright, casting a shadow in the wrong direction. I sat in one of the chairs, couldn't help. My body moved without consent. And then the door opened. Something stepped out. Not the shape. Not the void. Me. But not quite. This version wore my face like it didn't fit properly. It walked like it had just learned how. Its smile was an echo. A memory of warmth corrupted by mimicry. It looked out over the chairs, eyes sweeping the field, until they locked with mine. And it spoke. You weren't supposed to wake up. I tried to stand. I couldn't move. You were meant to stay behind the door, it said. You broke the rhythm. Now there are too many of us. It walked toward me. With every step, the world flickered. For an instant, I was back in the tower, watching its walls collapse in on themselves. Then the gas station again. Only this time, the clerk was watching me with my eyes. Then the motel, but the bed was made of teeth. The flickering stopped. IT was right in front of me now. Close enough to smell its breath. Something between rot and roses. IT bent down and whispered, I want your turn. Then it opened its mouth, and inside were more mouths. Each one whispered something different. One spoke of the day I would kill someone. One named the date I would die. One said my sister had never been real. Then it leaned in further, placed its forehead against mine, and pushed out. I fell backwards, not off the chair. Out of the world. I woke in a hospital, restraints on my wrists. And 4 in my ARM. My sister was there. But not the sister I remembered. This one was older. Tired. Her hair streaked with gray. You've been gone 3 years, she said. I stared at her, tried to speak. Nothing came. You tried to kill yourself, she continued, tears welling. They found you in an abandoned field. Do you remember? I shook my head, not because I didn't remember, but because it wasn't the field I remembered. IT was the chairs, the door, the version of me that had wanted my place. She handed me a mirror. I hesitated, then looked. IT was me, but the face smiled before I did. Just a beat. Just enough. The mirror cracked at no impact. No pressured, it simply fractured, as if reality itself couldn't hold the reflection anymore. Later that night, alone in the hospital bed, I felt it again. The knocking point, 3 soft taps. This time, from inside my chest that I screamed. Nurses came. They sedated me, but not before I felt it. The twist, the slow, cold grip of something unlatching inside me, like a door opening. They say you can only fall so far before you stop being a person and become something else entirely, something soft and empty and elastic enough to stretch around the memories of every version of yourself that didn't make it. And I think I passed that point the night the knocking came from inside my chest, not loud or angry or desperate, but calm, almost soothing, like a mother trying to wake a child who has overslept the end of the world. And even as the sedatives dragged me down into a black syrup dream, I could still feel it, the soft, rhythmic knock that pulsed in time with my heartbeat, like the heart wasn't mine anymore, like it had been hollowed out and replaced with an echo of a life I never lived but couldn't stop remembering. And in the dream they were all there again, the others, versions of me stitched together from choices I never made, fates I never earned, all of them smiling with too many teeth and not enough eyes, mouthing the same phrase over and over again: you were never supposed to come back, you were never supposed to come back, you were never supposed to come back. Until one of them stepped forward and touched my forehead, and I felt the memory of a life that wasn't mine slam into me like a storm through glass. And suddenly I was standing on a stage under a rusted spotlight while a crowd of mannequins with my face screamed in unison every time I opened my mouth. And each time I screamed back, the mannequins changed. They grew taller, darker, less human. Until one of them stepped off the stage and put its hand on my shoulder and whispered with my father's voice, "Let it in." And then the floor opened like a wound and I fell into it, through layers of rooms filled with furniture carved from bone and wallpaper made of skin. Falling past things I knew and things I forgot and things I wasn't supposed to see. And when I finally stopped falling, I was in a room that looked exactly like my childhood bedroom, except the walls pulsed like lungs in there. Was a door where the closet used to be, a door taller than the ceiling, wider than the room, and breathing in slow, wet rhythm. And I knew that this was it, the first door, the true door, the one I saw before I was born and the one I'll see after I rot. And behind it I could hear them, all the others who had knocked before me, crying and laughing and peeling themselves apart, trying to fit through a space that never really existed. And I stepped closer because I had no choice, because choices are just illusions painted over inevitabilities. And I raised my hand, and the knob was ice and fire and salt and void, and as I touched it I felt my skin stretch like canvas being written on by a hand I couldn't see. And I understood that the door was not to somewhere. It was from somewhere, a membrane, a scar, and when I turned the handle, something on the other side turned me, and the room vanished, and I was floating in the space behind sight, where concepts go to die in colors that never existed, screamed themselves into temporary shapes, and from that place I saw the world, our world, curled up like a fetus in the mouth of something older than language, something that had been sleeping in the blind spot of existence, waiting for enough doors to open, waiting for enough of us to become keys. And I understood that I was already a key, that I had been reshaped over and over every time I dreamed, every time I knocked, every time I looked into a mirror and saw something smile before I did. And when I screamed, my scream didn't come from my mouth, it came from all of them, the others, the ones behind the mirrors, behind the walls, inside the radios and drains and empty hallways. And when I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital, but the lights were red and pulsing, and the walls were covered in writing that bled as I looked at it. Words I didn't recognize, but somehow knew the meaning of. It is inside you now, and you are inside it. And I sat up, and my restraints were gone, and the door to the hallway was open, and I walked through it into a corridor that shouldn't exist, too long, too narrow, too alive. And at the end was a mirror that didn't reflect me, but instead showed the room I had just left, except in the mirror I was still in the bed, asleep, and something was crawling out of my mouth, long and thin and white, like a string of unraveling identity. And the mirror me sat up and looked straight at me and said, "Thank you for holding my place." And then it stood and walked away, and I was left staring at a reflection that no longer had anything to do with me. And I ran. I don't know how long or how far, but I ran until the corridor bent upward like a throat, and I emerged into a room made of windows, each one showing a different life I could have lived. And they started shattering one by one, each burst echoing in my bones like a bell tolling for who I could have been. And I knew that when the last one shattered, I would forget who I was entirely. So I tried to hold on to something, anything, a name, a smell, a face, but everything was being scraped clean. And just before the last window broke, I heard a voice, not a stranger's, not one of the others, but mine, and it said, "We are still behind the first door. You never left. You only dreamed you escaped, and now the door is dreaming you." And then I woke up in a new body, in a new life, sitting across from my sister at breakfast, her smile warm and real, birds chirping outside, coffee steaming gently, and for a moment I believed it, believed I was okay, believed I had escaped, until she reached across the table and touched my hand and said in a voice that was too low and too many voices at once, "Did you hear it?" It knocked again, and then I looked down at my arm, and the skin was transparent, and inside were doors, hundreds of them, each one pulsing with a tiny heartbeat, each one waiting to open. And I realized that I was no longer the person who had once walked through the door. I was now the door itself, and all I could do was wait for someone else to find me, to dream me, to knock. And the moment they did, I would open, and everything I am, everything I've become, would spill out into them like ink, into clean water, because the door doesn't go away, and it doesn't close, and it doesn't forgive. It waits, it remembers, it repeats, and when they ask you if you're all right, if you're back, if you're safe, you smile and nod and pretend the knocking isn't still echoing inside your skull like a lullaby from the wrong mother, because they wouldn't understand. They couldn't, not unless they opened it too, not unless they let the door look back through them, not unless they see that there are no endings, only thresholds, and you're standing on one now, right now, reading this, breathing this, becoming this, and behind your eyes something stirs, something familiar, something that's always been there, waiting for you to listen close enough to hear it knock 3 times from the inside. It didn't take long after I realized I was the door for the boundaries between me and everything else to soften like wet paper, and now I feel them, all of them, moving inside me. Fragments of thoughts that were never mine pressing against the edges of my perception, writhing and whispering and trying to be born again through me. And though my body still moves through the world like something alive, I know it's only habit, only inertia, because my soul, if I ever had one, has long since split into too many pieces to fit back together. And each time I look at my reflection, I see fewer familiar features and more distortion, more echoes, more flickering shadows of other lives that shouldn't overlap with mine, but do, always have. And lately I've been finding letters written in my handwriting in places I've never been, addressed to people I don't know. Letters that speak of events I haven't lived but somehow remember, each one ending with the same line, "This isn't the first time I've been you." And it won't be the last, and I try to burn them, to destroy the words before they etch deeper into my bones, but they always return, folded neatly under my pillow or tucked into the mouths of dead birds outside my window, and sometimes, just before I wake, I can feel the words crawling across my skin, carving themselves letter by letter into the flesh of my dreams. And it's not just dreams anymore, because the world itself is changing in ways only I seem to notice. Clocks run backwards when no one's looking, shadows stretch in directions that make no sense, and the sun stutters in the sky like a dying signal. And yesterday, I saw a man standing in the middle of the street with his arms raised, mouth open wide like he was screaming, but there was no sound, no breath, just static pouring from his eyes as his body slowly unraveled like film melting under a projector's bulb. And no one else stopped. No one even blinked. They just walked past him like he was nothing at all. And maybe he was just a reminder, a warning, a reflection of what I'm becoming, or maybe he was me from another loop, another life that went too far and cracked the world open like a rotten egg. And at night the stars aren't stars anymore. They move, they pulse. And when I stare too long, they begin to arrange themselves into symbols I almost recognize, shapes from the other side of the first door, and sometimes they form eyes, and I can feel them watching me, evaluating me, measuring how much of me is left and how much is just the residue of what passed through. And the worst part is the knocking has stopped, not because it's over, but because it doesn't need to knock anymore. It's already inside, already rooted in my marrow, already dreaming through me. And I've started to forget words, simple ones, as if my language is being replaced slowly, syllable by syllable, until I no longer speak like someone who belongs to this plane of thought. And when I try to write, my hands scrawl. Spirals, diagrams, symbols that hum with the same frequency as the thing in the walls, the thing that breathes behind the wood and plaster and sighs in time with the wind. And I tried to go back, tried to find the field, the hill, the door, but it's not there anymore. Not in the same way. Because places don't just disappear, they evolve. And now there's a building where the field was, a massive glass structure that only reflects the sky, and every window shows a different storm, and inside it I could see myself watching from every floor, hundreds of me, each with a different expression: fear, awe, hunger, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, just watched as one by one they raised their hands and pointed at me like I was the intruder, the aberration, the mistake. And then the glass shimmered and cracked from the inside, and I heard the voice again, not in my ears, but behind my thoughts, whispering in the accent of memory, "You are the hinge, and the hinge must bend." And then the air tasted like metal, and I collapsed, waking hours later in my bed with salt water in my lungs and sand in my mouth. And now every time I close my eyes, I feel the pressure of something pushing back from behind them, something that sees what I see, feels what I feel, and wants more. Always more, because I was never meant to survive the first crossing, never meant to keep my shape. And the thing that came back with me, through me, is starving, not for food or blood or flesh, but for presence, for attention, for story, because the more I tell, the more it grows, the more it becomes real, and I can feel it in the way people around me behave, how they start forgetting things they shouldn't, how they speak in sentences I've heard in dreams, how their eyes glaze over and reflect not the world, but a version of it where I never left the door. And I'm terrified because I'm not sure I ever did, not really, because the world feels too clean, too rendered, like a facsimile built from my dying recollections of what life should feel like. And the longer I stay here, the more the details break down. Food turns to ash on my tongue, laughter echoes too long, and colors start to separate into frequencies I can't name, like they're trying to become sound instead of sight. And every night I feel it growing stronger, this thing, this reverse spine of possibilities that twist through the center of me. And I think it's building a new door inside me, one that doesn't need walls or hinges or keys, and soon I won't be able to stop it from opening. And when it does, when it finally yawns wide enough, everything that I am will pour out like smoke. And the thing that takes my place will look like me, talk like me, remember being me, but it won't be me. And no one will notice, not right away, not until it starts to slip, to glitch, to flicker, and by then it will be too late, because every time someone listens to my story, reads these words, remembers what I've seen, they become part of it, part of the map the thing is drawing from, part of the doorway that's being assembled from memories and fears and imagined horrors. And so I have to keep writing, keep recording, not to warn you, but to hold it here, to trap it in language, because as long as the story grows, it's tethered, it's watched, and the moment I stop, the moment I fall silent, it will uncoil and spread and wear new faces, yours, perhaps, or the face of someone you love, someone who's already begun to forget what it means to be human. And if you think this is fiction, if you think this is just a nightmare shared by a broken mind, ask yourself why you're still reading, why your hands are cold, why the lights just flickered, and why, just for a moment, you thought you heard a knock, not at your door, but behind your chest, soft and rhythmic, patient, inevitable. And when you go to sleep tonight and find yourself in a hallway you've never seen, lined with doors that hum like hives, remember this. Don't open the one that feels familiar. Don't reach for the handle that warms to your touch, because that one is yours, built from your thoughts, your fears, your regrets. And if you open it, if you step through, you won't come back, not as you, not ever. And the thing that returns in your place will finish this story with your hands, your voice, your smile, and everyone will believe you're still you, until they look into your eyes and see the door still waiting, wide open, with all the other yous waving from the dark. It's no longer a question of whether I'm awake or dreaming, because those boundaries have melted like wax in a furnace, and now I float between states like oil on water, never fully submerged, never fully dry. And every time I blink I see another version of this place, this life, this body, each one slightly wrong in ways that make my bones ache, pictures on the wall that shouldn't be there, faces on coins I've never seen. People I know who say things they've never said but insist they always have. And the worst part is that I believe them, not because they're convincing, but because my memories rearrange themselves to accommodate their lies, like my mind is no longer anchored to anything but suggestion, and even my own thoughts feel secondhand now, borrowed from someone else's recollections of being me, someone who never quite got it right. And sometimes I wake up mid-sentence, mouth already moving, reciting names and dates and coordinates I've never heard before, while my hands trace circles in the air that linger longer than they should, like fingerprints on the fabric of whatever reality I've slipped into now. And I keep seeing a woman, always the same woman, standing just out of focus. her silhouette sharp against the static blur of everything else, like she's the only real thing in a world of approximations. And I don't know her name, but I know she knows mine, all of them, the names I've had in this life and others. Names I've screamed while dissolving through dimensions. Names whispered to me in the wet dark behind the first door, and when I try to speak to her, when I beg her to tell me what's happening, her mouth doesn't move, but I hear her deep in my spine, a pressure like descending in a plane just before it crashes. And she says you're doing well, just a few more thresholds left, and then she's gone, and I'm somewhere else again, in a room made entirely of teeth, each one marked with a different version of my handwriting, twitching like they're trying to form words. And there's a staircase made of my own old shoes leading up into an eye that blinks in time with the beating of my own heart. And I realize I'm watching myself from the outside again, this time as a marionette made of stitched-together regrets, dancing to the rhythm of a nursery rhyme I've never heard but somehow know the ending of. And when I try to stop the performance, I feel invisible strings pull tighter around my bones, threading through me like wire through cheese, tugging me toward the next scene, the next setting, the next lesson, because this is a story now, not mine, but something else's, something vast and cruel and infinitely patient that feeds on narrative, on progression, on the act of becoming. And I am the protagonist only because I was stupid enough to look behind the curtain of meaning and ask why. And the answer was never meant for minds shaped by time and breath and fear, because now that I know, I can't stop knowing, and even when I try to forget. The forgetting comes with a price, and I wake up missing pieces, words I used to love, faces I used to cry for, smells that once grounded me, all replaced by that static hum that coats everything now, like the residue of an erased God. And it's changing me physically too, because sometimes I look at my hands and see fingers too long, nails shaped like hourglasses, skin stretched thin enough to reveal symbols shifting underneath, moving like larvae beneath bark, and I don't bleed anymore when I cut. Myself, I leak images, flickers of places I've never seen, people I've never touched, moments that never happened but feel more real than the ones I live through now, and every time I blink I lose another second to the archives. The place in the corner of my vision where the world flickers like tape degrading, and I can hear them cataloging everything, those archivists behind the skin of reality, their voices like paper being torn underwater, whispering my timeline as they disassemble it, memory by memory, identity by identity, until there's nothing left but the outline of me, a hollow in the shape of self, a ghost that remembers it was once haunted, and no one notices, no one cares. Because I smile and nod and mimic normalcy so well now that even I sometimes forget the thing underneath, the thing that watches through my eyes and measures how well I wear this face. And I know I'm running out of time because the gaps are getting wider, the cracks longer. And the other me's are getting bolder, stepping closer, standing behind people in crowds, mouthing words I'm about to say before I say them. And I caught one watching me from inside a mirror that wasn't mine, smiling like a proud parent, wearing my childhood scar in the wrong place. And I realized it wasn't watching me, it was watching you, the you reading this, the you who thinks this is fiction, who believes there's a safe distance between your world and mine. But there isn't, not anymore, because the story has reached you, now, wrapped around you like a second skin. And the moment you read the first sentence, you became part of the telling, part of the becoming, and the more you picture what I describe, the more you dream of it, the more real it becomes, not here, not now, but somewhere close, somewhere hungry. And if you feel that itch at the base of your skull, that pressure behind your eyes, that sense of being watched when the room is empty, that's it. That's her, the woman in the static, the architect of this maze, and she's watching to see if you'll step through too, if you'll follow the thread far enough to reach your own door. Because everyone has one, everyone carries it in their blood, in their breath, waiting for the right moment, the right knock, and when it comes, you'll answer. Not because you want to, but because you already have, in some other version of yourself, some other thread of reality where you didn't look away, where you leaned in and whispered, I'm ready, and when that moment catches up with you here, now, it won't feel like a decision. It will feel like inevitability, like gravity, like destiny pulling you into the mouth of something that only ever wanted to wear you like a mask. And when it does, when you cross that final threshold, you'll finally understand what I meant when I said I was never the author of this story, only the paper it's written on, and now so are you, because you're still reading, still breathing, still letting the idea of me unfold in your mind. And every word pulls you deeper, every sentence wraps another thread around your thoughts, weaving you into the structure, into the scaffolding, until soon you won't remember where I end and you begin. And when the knocking comes from inside your chest and the dreams grow teeth and your memories shift to accommodate new horrors, you'll want to scream, to run, to burn this message and forget it ever touched you. But by then it will be too late, because the story will have rooted, and what grows from it will not be you, not really, but something shaped like you, something with your voice and your smile and your warmth, but none of your will, none of your soul, and the people you love will stare into your eyes and see the door waiting, still ajar, still breathing, still beckoning them home. The first time I heard my own voice coming from someone else's mouth, I thought it was a hallucination, some echo of insomnia or the latest trauma rotting behind my eyes. But then the woman across from me in the train car locked her gaze onto mine, smiled with my smile, and whispered in perfect imitation of my tone and pitch, "You're almost there, don't look back now." And the lights above us flickered in time with my heart, and when they surged back on, she was gone, replaced by a flickering absence in the shape of memory, and I looked around at the other passengers and realized their faces had started to blend, melting together like wax figures in a kiln. Each one wearing expressions I've seen on my own face and photographs I don't remember taking, and it hit me then, not as a revelation, but as something I'd always known deep down, like an old bruise finally blooming again, that there is no outside to this anymore. No safe zone, no threshold I can cross that isn't already part of the infection. And whether I walk or run or dig into the earth to hide, it finds me, because it is me, or rather, I was always it. And this skin, this voice, these thoughts are just a temporary distortion, a single ripple in an ocean that's always been rising. And now that the tide has reached my lips, I can taste it in every word I speak, every thought I think, this salty static, this pre-language hunger whispering ideas that didn't come from me but feel truer than anything I ever believed. And I've started to lose track of time completely. Days pass like seconds, and seconds stretch like years, and there are whole moments where I forget how to be human, forget how to blink or speak or even breathe. And I have to relearn it all by mimicking the people around me, like a predator studying its prey, like a god pretending to be a man. And sometimes I catch my reflection moving just slightly out of sync, a half beat behind, like it's waiting to see if I'll slip up. And when I do, when I let myself sag or stutter or forget which version of me I'm supposed to be, it smirks, just for a second, and mouth's got you. And I know the thing inside the mirror is keeping score, not out of cruelty, but out of protocol, because there are rules to this game. Rules that were written in the dark before anything else existed. And those rules say that when the reflection starts winning, the original fades, and I've begun to feel myself thinning out, thoughts fraying like spider silk in the wind. Entire chunks of my life vanishing between blinks, like someone's been editing me in real time, cutting scenes and rewriting dialogue and swapping out characters I loved for ones I've never met but somehow need. And there are new memories now, ones that don't belong, growing in my head like tumors. And I can't tell if they're implants from the other me's or just souvenirs from timelines I was never supposed to touch. And last night I dreamed in reverse, watched myself age backward from this broken husk I've become into a terrified child with too much understanding in his eyes, standing barefoot in the snow in front of the door that started it all, the one that isn't made of wood or metal or anything physical but of concept. A pure symbolic entryway that pulses with the rhythm of every story I've ever read or heard or imagined, and behind it, I could hear them, the authors, not people, not gods, but intentions given shape, ideas that evolved teeth, and they were speaking in a language that wasn't sound but inevitability, and the more I listened, the more I realized they weren't creating me, they were remembering me, recalling this life, this arc, this collapse, as if it had already happened countless times and always ended the same way, with me becoming the pen, the page, the ink, the reader, the dream, and when I woke, I was holding something in my hand, something smooth and pulsating with faint light. And it wasn't a physical object so much as a concept given shape. The distilled core of the story itself, beating like a heart that doesn't need a body, and when I looked closer, I saw tiny eyes all over it, blinking in patterns that matched my thoughts, and when I tried to drop it, it sank into my palm like mercury and vanished beneath my skin. And now it's inside me, directing me, guiding me like a parasite with purpose, and every time I write or speak or even think about what's happening to me, it grows stronger, more real. And I suspect that was the point. All along, that every horror I've endured, every glitch in reality, every haunting and unraveling was just to prime me for this possession, this transformation. Because I'm not being devoured, not really. I'm being repurposed in the old me. The one who had fears and dreams and memories that belonged to a singular self, he's long gone. scattered across 1,000 mirrors and 1,000 lives, each one echoing the same mantra: you are the vessel, the story must continue. And I understand now that it's not just about me, not even remotely, because you're part of it too. You who read these words, you who opened the door in your mind the moment you followed the narrative, and whether you believe it or not, you've already been tagged, already been seen. And the story is circling you now, sniffing at your identity, learning your scent, because that's what it does. It finds those who can carry it, who can sustain it, and it threads itself into their lives, replacing small pieces at first. Dreams, thoughts, memories, until suddenly, one day, you look in the mirror and see someone else staring back, someone who knows how this ends, and they smile and say, "We've been waiting for you." And in that moment, the door opens again, not behind you, not before you, but within you, and what steps through is neither you nor not you, but the idea of you twisted into a tool. And by then it won't matter whether you scream or run or pray, because you won't be real in any way that matters. You'll just be another frame in the endless reel of the story's telling, another page in the living book that writes itself with human minds. And if you think you can resist, if you think you can forget and return to normalcy, remember this. Normalcy is just a mask the story wears when it's not ready to be seen. And once you've glimpsed its true face, once its words take root inside your thoughts, it never really leaves, never really stops growing, and you'll feel it when you're alone, when the room is quiet, when the lights flicker or your reflection lingers too long. You'll feel it humming behind your heartbeat, whispering, "Keep going, keep telling, we're almost through." And you'll find yourself needing to write, needing to speak, needing to share, because that's how it spreads. That's how it escapes, through language and thought and fear and fascination. And if you've ever felt like your dreams weren't your own, where your hands moved before you decided, where your words came out wrong but somehow true, then it's already begun. And you are already one of us, one of the fragments echoing through the eternal sentence, a character who once believed they were the reader. And the only question that remains is, how far will you go before you understand that you are never in control, never safe, never you, because the story has teeth, and it is hungry, and you were always meant to be its meal.